All right, we are ready to proceed. Mr. Harmon.
Please support
Yes.
councils. All four of these defendants, they all sit over here at this L-shaped table. They sit over here and they are convicted because last week 12 of you went back there and you came back with a just and a true verdict convicting them, and they sit there in their guilt. They are convicted. Convicted conspirators, convicted killers, they are convicted murderers. There is no doubt about that. What this is about is an entirely different thing. What you're here to decide today and going into tomorrow is what is the appropriate sentence for these defendants. They have been convicted, as the state told you in its opening statement, of planning and acting as a team in a concerted effort with one common goal: murder. Murder, the most evil and the most wicked crime that there is, the taking of another human life. And the evidence in this case has clearly demonstrated to you. I doubt any of you had any issue back there determining when you were deliberating that this was a premeditated crime. The court is going to instruct you tomorrow when you go out after all of the closing statements. She's going to read to you again the law on premeditation. And you remember that law from last week. You remember it? There has to be enough time to allow reflection for there to be premeditation. And clearly in your verdicts, you have found that. You would not have convicted them of conspiracy because you can't conspire. You can't have four people conspiring without premeditation. Was there premeditation in this case? Yes. But there was much, much more than just simple premeditation. Because when we talk about reflections, what are we talking about? Reflecting, having time to reflect. We're talking about decision making. Making a decision and acting upon that decision. That is reflecting. Solving a problem. That is reflecting. These defendants, in this case, did this for over 2 weeks at least, making decisions, solving problems, working through their plan. This is much more than simple premeditation. Premeditation can occur in a matter of moments. Let's look at the evidence of the heightened level of premeditation. These four defendants, by June 6th, the evidence tells us, had already planned, had already conspired, were already teaming up to snatch Charles Jones' life from him. June 6th. You recall this? The X spaces discussion that was going on between Isaiah Chance and the victim in this case, Charles Jones. And what happens after that communication between them? That's what happens. Sean Gathright's phone has communication from his co-defendant Rashad Murphy's phone at approximately 11:18 hours. And shortly after that recording was obtained by the Jacksonville Sheriff's Office at 22:36 hours of Isaiah Chance arguing with Charles Jones. You remember his words. Hey, Julio, how's your foot doing? Make sure, this is out of Rashad Murphy's mouth. Make sure, brah, in a good headspace, before he go with his move, we got bigger shit to tend to. They ain't worth an inward energy right now. That's directed at who? That's directed at his teammate, Sean Gathright. And what does Mr. Gathright do? 17 days before this murder happens, he likes that. He likes it. And then he replies, I ain't heard from bro today, but I'm going to check in with him. And then Rashad Murphy texts back, he probably not going to pick up. He on IG letting these N-words get him out of character. He turned up on that MF right now. And then Mr. Gathright. Damn, all right, let me see what's up. So what does that tell us? That tells us that the plan was already in place more than 17 days before. This plan had been birthed, hatched, and formulated before June 6th. Before June 6th. This conspiracy and this premeditation spoke to a much higher level of premeditation and spoke to a very, very cold-blooded motive, a planned execution. As Miss Doherty told you last week, this was a hit. This was a hit. This kind of advanced planning, where that evil and that type of wickedness to take somebody is dwelling in a person's heart, and in this case, a team of people, problem solving, making decisions about it, working their way through this, developing the plan as they go along. A plan to not just murder, but if necessary, inflict carnage. And we saw that in the evidence. They were going to take out 6, and they were going to take out whoever might be there that might be in 6, because why not? And anyone else standing around, anyone else that might get in the way, that's just collateral damage. Now, why is the state going back through the facts with you? Because in the aggravating factors that you're going to be instructed on in this case, we are relying on that evidence. We are relying, as you saw, solely on our evidence from the guilt phase of this trial. Now, we did present some evidence. That evidence goes to rebut their suggestions of mental health mitigation, which you have seen have completely been rebutted and completely disproven. It is because of the extremely heightened level of premeditation in this case that the state, is presenting you with the aggravating factor, one that the law speaks to, of very cold-blooded murders. The aggravating factor of cold, calculated, and premeditated, that this murder was committed in a cold, calculated, and premeditated manner without any pretense of moral justification. That is the aggravating factor. We see in that evidence, the X spaces evidence, we see that evidence of this existing weeks before, but we see more than that. We see a conspiracy where its members are trying to ensure its integrity, its secrecy, and that it stays intact, and that nothing ruins the plan. Nothing gets in the way. I want to talk and walk back through the evidence in this case with you. Let's take a look at what occurred in this case. Mr. Murphy with his fully automatic Glock. And I'm going to come back to that because there's a few things I'll be pointing out to you in this evidence. It's very rare, folks, that an execution is caught on video like this. Look at the teamwork. Look at the precision. Look at the efficiency. That evidence alone, standing alone, without the X spaces evidence, without the Airbnb evidence of no one going through the front door, without all the other evidence, the evidence of Mr. Chance and Mr. Gathright coolly, calmly, businesslike loading up that Impala, without any of that evidence, you could look at this alone and your common sense would be screaming at you that this is the product, this type of murder, it's the product of heightened premeditation. That doesn't happen without conspiratorial premeditation, planning, wearing disguises to cover their identities. And not just disguises, folks. They're wearing all black to hide in the darkness, to hide their skin, to hide their faces. They're wearing hoodies. These are disguises. These are items that they brought with them as part of this plan. This alone, this evidence and the efficiency, the positioning, demonstrates the premeditation and the planning that went into this. And this evidence alone would be sufficient evidence beyond any doubt that this was a product of heightened, cold, calculated, premeditation and murder. The tenacity that occurs here, the lack of hesitation that occurs. This is a fully formed, committed mission that they are on that is immediately executed. As soon as the opportunity presents itself, they come out of the shadows where they're hiding. And we saw Mr. Davion Murphy, who snuck down behind those cars. And you heard me asking these forensic experts, isn't that significant that he did that? That he had the mindset and cognitive ability to hide behind the cars to avoid being detected by a very wary victim, someone who had his life almost taken 9 months before in an attempted murder that Mr. Gathright is connected to by physical scientific evidence. A very wary prey that because of their advanced planning, they were not going to allow him to get away. And we saw that in the tenacity of this, how Mr. Gathright continued in a persistent fashion, chasing after the Charger, pumping rounds into it. And then we didn't even get to Davion Murphy following down behind the cars and unloading down the west side of the hotel. So this is the aggravator. The first-degree murder was committed in a cold, calculated, premeditated manner without any pretense of moral or legal justification. Cold. Cold means the murder was the product. Calm and cool reflection. Calculated means having a careful plan, a plan that is carefully constructed or prearranged, designed to commit murder. In the instructions that Judge Sisko will give you, she will read to you, and you will see that is the exact same instruction you got earlier on premeditation last week. But below that is her distinguishing this aggravating factor from simple premeditation. The aggravating factor to apply has to have a heightened level of premeditation demonstrated by a substantial period of reflection. A substantial period of reflection. Without any pretense of moral or legal justification. So what does this mean? It simply means that there is no claim of justification or excuse, even if it was insufficient to reduce the degree of the murder, that it would rebut the otherwise cold, calculated, or premeditated nature of this murder. Folks, there is no way to rebut the premeditated nature of this murder. There's just simply no way. There's way too much evidence of it. It is part of this. It's part and parcel of what we watched on that video. You cannot separate the two. To commit that type of crime would be impossible on the spur of the moment. That crime doesn't just speak of a lack of impulsivity Remember hearing that term earlier in the last day or two? It doesn't just speak of a lack of impulsivity. It screams that this was extremely planned, that this was a designed mission. Rashad Murphy, let's talk about his participation in this plan. And I'm not going to go back through the amount of evidence that I covered with you in opening. I know that was a long process. The state wanted to give you an overview of this massive case full of evidence because of the just incredible investigative efforts of the Tampa Police Department and the Jacksonville Sheriff's Office in this case. Mr. Murphy obtains the Chevy Cruze, the silver Chevy Cruze. That's his first part of the contribution to this case. The car that's utilized as surveillance and as a spotter car, a car that's outside of the circle. Then Mr. Murphy, on his Airbnb account, sending his ID and reserving that Airbnb. And now we see the teamwork coming in. Right around the same time, within minutes, you remember in the evidence, Isaiah Chance receiving a $390 payment from another gang member, an ATK gang member, J. Breezy, sent to his Mr. Rich Off War Cash App. And that payment is made to Airbnb. It's paid. And that is established and that's arranged. We have that done over a day before this murder happens. And then we have this video. If the video of the murder itself doesn't establish how premeditated and planned, we need only look at this video, because even if you got rid of the X spaces discussions and you didn't have the earlier in the morning paying of an Airbnb, and you have these two defendants, Mr. Gathright and Mr. Chance, businesslike. Look at him. Look at the confidence that Mr. Gathright carries with him. They could very well have been packing to go on a cruise or something, and they are packing up that Impala with high-powered rifles, with ammunition, with disguises, the tools they would need to carry out this mission. That's in the afternoon. That is hours, 20 hours or so before the murder happens. And then when they get to Tampa, and they have to drive, remember, because this conspiracy now is traveling from Jacksonville down here to Tampa. They have to travel for 3 hours to get down here. And they're coordinating. We saw that in the LPR, that both these cars are following and coordinating, again showing advanced planning. But when they get here, we see this real-time demonstration of premeditation on the part of Mr. Gathright. And I'm gonna come back to that. Not too long after that, after Mr. Gathright is going through the Airbnb app and utilizing all their filters and searching and trying to find Charles Jones' Airbnb and trying to get an address for where he may be, utilizing the description that he is seeing on what's being posted by Mr. Jones. Not too long after that, we get this message from Mr. Murphy. Man, you know I want it myself. If I could, I would have had it. So many hoes there. I know somebody can get it from them. Get the B&B for me, gang. They're all trying to find the Airbnb. And then after the run to the McDonald's to get provisions for this assault team and this surveillance team, and they all have a dinner, a late night dinner to make sure they got enough energy, they start coordinating. And remember in the evidence, by this point, these two defendants, Mr. Gathright and Mr. Chance, they've already gone down to teasers. They've already cased teasers. They've already checked it out to get the lay of the land. They start coordinating. Mr. Chance is not using his phone because he's going to use his girlfriend's phone. He doesn't want to use his phone. He doesn't want to be tracked. and he doesn't want to be connected. So they start sharing information. Mr. Gathright stores Ms. Andrews' phone's information and his phone and a contact. They start sharing locations with each other. Now we're up to 2:08. They're still communicating with each other, coordinating. We see the coordination. We see Mr. Chance and his contributions starting here in the actual pursuit and the stalking and the hunting of Charles Jones. He's at teasers. As Miss Doherty told you, he's wearing a hoodie. He's wearing a COVID mask. He's using his girlfriend as kind of a decoy or camouflage so that he's not standing around in the middle of the summer wearing a hoodie and a mask looking suspicious. It's just a young couple walking around in the parking lot. And they are there and they're observing Charles Jones and his friends as they're at teasers. Still communicating. Now they're trying to get Gathright to pick up his phone, maybe trying to FaceTime him, which we learned in the evidence is not collected in CDRs, call detail records. And they're telling him, pick up your effing phone. More coordination through the time that Mr. Jones is leaving. And now he and his entourage have gone to Truth 18, and they're at Truth 18, and they're getting ready to leave from there. And more coordination. Sharing location so they can follow each other. Which leads us to the hotel. We know from the evidence, and I'm going to come back and I'm going to specifically address Mr. Gathright, because I know you all have concerns about Mr. Gathright. He was 18 years old. The state's never hid from that fact. Is that a mitigating factor? Absolutely, it's a mitigating factor. And it's up to each of you to decide how much weight you want to give that. But we need to look at what Mr. Gathright did, and we need to look at how he conducted himself in this early morning, well past loading that Impala. That's Mr. Gathright driving that Impala. And you remember, the assault team never would have been able to find that hotel if Mr. Chance and Miss Andrews hadn't have followed the victims, stayed just far enough behind and tailing them so they weren't detected, but able to see where they were going and relay that. Because Mr. Gathright, coordinating with his co-conspirator in this extremely premeditated plot, went directly to where the victim and his entourage had already gone. They had already pulled into the home to suites when Mr. Gathright was nowhere to be seen. Mr. Gathright immediately navigates that Impala around the north end of that hotel, passing all of those cars in that parking lot, passing all of the filled parking spots as he went around the north through that complex, around the Holiday Inn and back around to the west side. Now what we see in these photographs is Mr. Gathright navigating that car and making sure to do a three-point turn so he doesn't reveal their presence in this car that they have hidden. Now, if you go back to Truth 18, which I kind of skipped over, you remember Mr. Chance, the surveillance team. He gets out with Miss Andrews because they're just a young couple, and they can get closer and make closer observation and give that intelligence to the strike team, the hit team, the assault team. Mr. Gathwright's driving the Impala. He parks across the street, or parks, right next to the strip mall where Truth 18 is. But as they're getting ready to leave, and they're getting information that he must have been receiving, Mr. Gathright repositions across the street and pulls up to that stop sign. And one thing you may have seen in the evidence, he stops and then he creeps forward so that he can see around that corner and see the entourage and see the victim's car. You heard Detective Ramos, this detective who did this incredible job and sat on the stand as a true encyclopedia of this case, telling you it is his opinion they were getting ready to possibly try an assault or to follow. But he gets there, and he's also now part of the surveillance. And he's staging, waiting. Here in the hotel parking lot, he is taking the precautions. He goes down, and then he turns the car around and comes back without going around that corner or breaking the plane where they could be seen. He goes up around the corner. There he goes past the Tesla. They park. And then you have to think, there's no way they were driving around Tampa in June with hoodies and masks over their face for 4 hours. Because you remember, this starts at around 1 in the morning, 2 in the morning, and this is now 4:30 in the morning, 3.5 hours at least. So they had to kit up, get their hoodies on, pull these masks or gaiters or whatever they're using to cover their faces. Mr. Gathright has to retrieve that AR-15. And now he's handling it, and they're running, and they're acting as a team. These 3 individuals that are the assault team. And as I said, Rashad Murphy, or Davion Murphy, with his ski mask on, with only eye holes showing, with the 300 blackout, crouched down, making himself unobtrusive, trying to make sure that they conceal their presence. Because this was all predicated and designed around an ambush. And you remember the state telling you in opening statements that they brought fire supremacy? That was part of the plan. That was part of this, to bring overwhelming firepower to this situation, because they weren't going to let Charles Jones get away. Not this time. Not this time. They were going to take him. He was not going back to Jacksonville. He was going to stay here in Tampa. So they bring 3 shooters with high-powered rifles and all of this firepower. In a few minutes, I'm going to talk to you about another aggravating factor that deals with that. But I will say it again. That firepower was brought for a specific purpose, to make sure he didn't escape, and anyone else that got shot, it didn't matter to any of these defendants. Not a one of them. No hesitation that they were sitting in front of a hotel with a packed parking lot. So now we're up to the point where they're going to commit this assault. And I want each of you to consider in this evidence, and I don't want to belabor the point, because I think you all understand, and I don't think any of you disagree, that there is heightened premeditation here. But the law speaks to that reflection element, and that's something you need to take into account. As I said, it's decision making, it's problem solving. And you think about all of the decisions in the problem solving that goes on. Mr. Gathright's use of the Airbnb app and the VRBO app and that search alone, I'm going to come back to that in a few minutes, that sitting by itself is an overwhelming load of decision and problem solving, decision making. But think of all the decisions they had to make. Mr. Murphy had to try to coordinate Mr. Rashad Murphy to get that cruise. He had to talk to his sister, or his brother's mother of his brother's children, and he had to coordinate with her, because someone had to go get the car. Either he had to go pick it up or she had to bring it to him. Every one of these steps required multiple smaller steps and multiple decisions and problem solving. Well, can you drop it off? We'll drive you back. Or can I pick it up from you? And then he's got to get someone to drop him off. And we know he's driving it when he goes to the Walmart, and someone there is driving it, and they come and pick him up when he comes out of the Walmart the night before. That alone just shows another example of the problem solving, the decision making, and then the back and forth with Airbnb and booking the Airbnb and finding an Airbnb that just happens to be 2 miles from Teasers and ends up being almost 1.33 miles, just over a mile from the murder scene, but in that same area right there around Busch Gardens. So now we have our assaulters. these three defendants, the two Murphys and Mr. Gathright. And I kind of want to walk through this with you, and I may have to use this laptop here to do it. I want you to look at where Mr. Murphy's rounds are hitting. They're hitting to the center left of that windshield. Mr. Murphy, Rashad Murphy, opens up first. He runs out, immediately starts firing with that fully automatic Glock and puts several rounds tracking up the hood into that windshield. Watch the driver's side of the windshield and the back window of the Altima. Now we're seeing impacts to the driver's side, and you can see the glass spraying upwards from the impacts through that automobile windshield glass. And we know Camilla Bentley is in that car on the right, the Altima. She's already got her foot on the brake, and watch when her car starts to move. First impact, second impact. And we know she takes the 2 rounds to the back of that car. This is efficiency. This is overwhelming firepower. So Mr. Murphy, Rashad Murphy, has stuck his head around the corner and looked. And the way that he and Mr. Gathright coordinate, it's almost as if they did a countdown, like a 3, 2, 1 or something. But they come out and they take up their firing positions quickly, efficiently, which shows heightened premeditation, and they're acting immediately. Watch Mr. Gathright. He will not even be in a standing position before he's opening fire. He is running into his position and starting to fire when his feet are moving. That's how quickly they wanted to put rounds before anyone could react to them. He's already firing. It's still moving at that point. But look where he's pointing. He's pointing towards the Charger. And then you see his muzzle swing to the right. Right there. He's making an intentional decision to redirect his fire after he has put 2 rounds through the windshield of that Charger, and now he's redirecting to the Altima, which they thought Tafa McRae was driving, a 6-block member. But in fact, Camilla Bentley had slid into place. Camilla Bentley, who was in the back seat, and for some reason, I don't know if you all looked at that when you were deliberating, but it's almost weird the way she slides in behind Tafa as he's getting out. And I believe her testimony to you was, I wanted to take charge. I wanted to get in the front seat. She would have been in that back seat if she hadn't have done that. And those 2 rounds were centered through the rear window. I'll talk about that later. Look at the purposeful, intentional behavior of Mr. Gathright here before Mr. Murphy appears up here, Davion. This perfect coordinated attack. He gets hit by it, runs into the tree, almost falls down, turns, continues to fire rounds into that car. Now they're both firing into it. Almost perfect timing. And now Mr. Gathright is still firing. And look at where he's firing. He's firing to the northwest towards that Charger. But just look at the tenacity. That is purpose-driven behavior. This was something that had been in their hearts and minds, the point I'm trying to make, for weeks, for days. To murder someone, to take someone's life. And you see this overwhelming firepower. There was no consideration for anyone else in that area. None whatsoever. If they hit some 6-block members, that's all the better. And anyone who else, and this is another thing. when they're coming out of teasers or Truth 18, Mr. Gathright sitting over there at the stop sign. He sees the size of that entourage. He sees how many people are involved. He knows how many people are in those cars. Ms. Doherty pointed this out to you. Look at the accuracy of those rounds into the headrests. Both headrests taking rounds. Sean Gathright shooting an AR-15 chambered in 5.56 NATO. What caliber were the 2 rounds pulled out of Charles Jones' body? Well, the 1 round, what was its caliber? It was a .22 caliber class, 5mm class, which 5.56. The other round they could not figure out the caliber. Ms. Drew couldn't, but she could tell you they had consistent rifling, and they appeared to be from the same type of rifling. Mr. Gathright put 2 5.56 round NATO bullets into Charles Jones' body. We don't know about the other bullet to the chest. That could have been from Rashad Murphy, and it would make sense. Davion Murphy, look at him crouching down, hurriedly getting into place, running behind those cars, staying concealed, staying in his hiding place. You remember, in his area where he cannot be seen because he doesn't want to reveal that he's there. They may try to go somewhere else. They want them to go that direction. They want them to go into that area. And they don't want them to flee or have a chance to get away. And then, again, coming back, Mr. Murphy's tenacity, purpose-driven behavior. He's not giving up. He's not going to stop. And then quickly back to the car. Does that speak to you as someone who has a cognitive impairment? Rashad Murphy running back to the car. The image on the right, if you look at the direction of his head, he's looking towards the fleeing car. His direction is towards Charles Jones' Charger. And you can see in this image he's now moved slightly forward and he's still looking in that direction. All of them were paying attention to what was going on with Charles Jones. Now, they finally get back to Jacksonville the next day. And for the first time in all the evidence, the ghost is revealed. Rashad Murphy, in person, showing up. Rashad Murphy, who tried to conceal, to try to protect the conspiracy 17 days before, when Isaiah Chance was talking to the victim and arguing with him, trying to get him to stop. You don't want to give us up. You don't want them to know what we're up to. You don't want to give them advance notice that something might happen. The ghost, who never appears on the ring camera at the Airbnb in Tampa. That takes thoughtful, deliberate action in and of itself. None of these defendants appear on that ring camera on the 22nd when they get there. They're going in and out of that Airbnb, as Miss Doherty told you, all through that evening. Chance and Gathright are going down to case the teasers earlier in the evening. They're leaving to go. Chance is going with his girlfriend and Mr. Davion Murphy up to the McDonald's to get food, and they never appear until after everything is done. Before I move away from the cold, calculated, premeditated, I want to move back to Isaiah Chance and just kind of cover some of his involvement in this case. We talked about this. He's the one that actually pays through J. Breezy's contributions for the Airbnb. He provides the Glock with the extended magazine that is utilized by Rashad Murphy in the attack. He helps load the Impala. Now we see the photographs of him on the left. That teaser's on the right at Truth 18 with Miss Andrews providing the essential, critical, on-the-ground, real-time intelligence and reconnaissance back to the assault team. There's no way, as I said earlier, that Mr. Gathright would have been able to find where the victim went unless he was right on their tail revealing himself. The only way he knew to do it was because Mr. Chance told him. And when they needed him to come in for last-second reconnaissance, remember how fast after he had staged across the street at the Embassy Suites area at USF, he comes flying back across Fowler, blows that red light, and pulls right in and drives right past the victim in the car that they all know is not going to be recognized. That's why Mr. Rashad Murphy had to solve that problem and go get that car. And now Mr. Chance is providing last minute, literally, last second intelligence to the assault team. So he drives in, drives past, goes around the corner, encounters the Impala, goes right past it, does that three-point turn, and then he comes back. This is him still going, and then this is him coming back. And we know in the evidence this is less than a minute before the attack occurs. That didn't happen for no reason. That was a coordinated effort. And without Mr. Chance's information and intelligence to them, they wouldn't have known for a fact where Charles Jones was sitting. If you look at the passenger side of that Charger, you can see Mr. Jones' red and white socks sitting up there on the dashboard, moving back and forth. I don't know if you saw it when you were deliberating last week, but when the attack occurs, you quickly see his feet drop down as he's trying to scramble into the back seat to save himself. But clearly, they were there for a purpose, and that was to tell the assault team exactly where Charles Jones was. When you're considering Mr. Chance and Mr. Gathright, you need to consider their contributions to this murder and their role they played in this murder. Without these two defendants, this never, ever would have happened. It never would have happened. Without Mr. Chance providing that real-time intelligence, they would not have been able to track Charles Jones. They would not have been able to orchestrate this attack. Mr. Gathright, we know that the attack, this whole thing that day starts where? It starts at the Gathright household. In the Gathright household out in the suburbs in Jacksonville. And again, we see this extremely confident defendant, Mr. Gathright, loaded for bear, loading up his car as if they're going on a vacation, just as casual as could be, without a care. He and Mr. Chance are discussing how they're going to load it, where they're going to put the items, more problem solving, more decision making. Back and forth. And of course we know from the evidence, from the search warrant that was conducted at the Gathright residence, that Mr. Gathright was the armorer of this assault team. He was the weapons man. He provided the armament that was utilized, this weapon being utilized by Davion Murphy. That rifle being utilized by Mr. Gathright. And you heard in the evidence from the very compelling testimony of Officer De Jesus that that rifle was being utilized with a high level of skill. The sling that was attached to it being utilized to stabilize the rifle, and we saw its effect. 2 rounds right next to each other, and Charles Jones' back, fired by this 18-year-old at the time defendant, right through the windshield, and then the 2 well-placed parallel rounds right through the back window. And then the brass catchers, which unfortunately for these defendants had those 2 shell casings in it from that matched the gun that fired, the Glock that fired Mr. Chance's Glock that fired that Mr. Murphy, Rashad Murphy utilized. He provided the modification to that weapon and manipulated the weapon so that there wouldn't be shell casings left. Not this time. Because you remember, back in October of 23, in the first attack on Charles Jones, they were able to match shell casings from that scene to the shell casings found when these officers stopped Mr. Gathright. Those shell casings. And of course, Mr. Gathright provided ammunition as well as the rifles. So I want to talk to you about this. I don't have audio on this, but I just want you to watch for a few minutes what is occurring in this screen-recorded video on his iCloud. Look at that time, 8:30, 8:40. That's a work day before the murder happens. That's 8 hours before the murder happens. And we know that this defendant, look at the problem solving right there in real time in that evidence, the decision making going on from, as Raul Benasco told us, a very mature defendant who can take care of himself. Look at him going through. And then we're going to see him start using the multiple filters. A property on the water, a property with this many rooms, a property that has a pool, a property with a barbecue. Trying to figure this out. This evidence, in and of itself, is overwhelming premeditation. This just drips with premeditation. It's saturated with it. And it goes on. You remember in the trial when we played this for you, this goes on for minutes and minutes and minutes of tenacious, goal-oriented, purpose-driven behavior by this defendant. And what was the whole purpose of this? Was he looking for an Airbnb? Was he looking to rent a property? Was he doing anything of any kind of productivity? No. He's trying to find their prey. He's trying to find Charles Jones, their target, desperately trying to find him, actively trying to find him. That phone's not moving itself. That's his fingers doing that. Searching, looking. Now the filtering. When you're considering the weight of this aggravating factor and you're comparing it and weighing it against a significant mitigator that he was 18, this is what you need to look at. When you're assessing the value and quality that this was a cold, calculated, and premeditated murder. And remember, your considerations are to each individual defendant as far as their sentence. It's an individual sentence. But because this is a conspiracy, because they acted as a team, a lot of this evidence, you got to look at it as a whole. You got to look at it as a whole. Every one of them, this cold, calculated, premeditated aggravator applies to each of them. This alone, this is enough premeditation to convict 1,000 people of first-degree premeditated murder. But it doesn't end there, because at 1:30, this defendant is not done hunting and searching for Mr. Jones. Now he's going to utilize a technique, a honeypot. He's going to use a honeypot technique, if you've ever heard of that term. A honeypot, a lure. He's going to try to lure and get that information by luring it out of someone, by using this pretty young girl, Kyla. who unbelievably goes along with this. I need you to text Fat Boy. We never know who Fat Boy is. It's probably Xavier Edwards. About what? As I need you to text Fat Boy, tell him you're trying to pull up about trying to see him tonight. He know I'm gone. I've been FaceTiming him while I'm out. She doesn't really understand at first. He in Tampa right now. Make it seem like you know he's there. He had a B&B with 6. Be like, what's WYA? Where are you at? I want to pull up. I'm drunk and trying to F. Never mind. Then she says, we at Tier the club, because she's not following. You want to come to the B&B with us? Question mark, because she's not understanding. No, I'm in Tampa. I'm trying to see where his B&B at. Who B&B? 6. Fools. It's his B-day and Fat Boy with him. Not here in Jacksonville. No, they in Tampa. What? She still doesn't understand, but that doesn't stop him. He persists. Let me FaceTime. Play like you know it. Fat Boy going to Beezer's tonight or some shit like that. Clearly, this defendant was persistent that night and tenacious in his attempts to locate Charles Jones. And then we know that in addition to all of this effort and involvement in this case, because, folks, the evidence in this case shows there is no defendant sitting over here. There is no defendant in this case who did more to orchestrate this murder than Mr. Gathright. They may be as involved in him, but nobody exceeds his culpability in this murder. He adds and provides the car for the assault team, the Impala. He drives all the way down there and takes the entire intelligence and surveillance team with him. We talked about this, how he drove around the parking lot, how he maneuvered and kept the assault team from being detected. That's on that defendant's shoulders in this cold, calculated, premeditated murder. And where does this whole thing end? Back at the Gathright residence in the suburbs in Jacksonville. Now, he's not there. No, this defendant's not there. He's over in Auburndale in Polk County dropping the Impala off with his unsuspecting grandmother, leaving it with his grandmother, Miss Allen, and then driving off in her 4Runner, now loaded with all of that ammunition and all that other evidence. Before I talk about this aggravating factor, I want to talk about the cold, calculated, premeditated evidence in this case. This evidence alone and this aggravating factor alone, if we had no other aggravating factor, would justify a sentence of death for each one of these defendants. Standing alone, it would justify a sentence of death. Because this is a boatload of premeditation. This is, like I said, it's enough premeditation to convict thousands of men. There could have been 40 people participating that each had just a little chunk of this 2 weeks, more than 2 weeks of premeditation. And they all could have been convicted as principals to first-degree murder. It's overflowing. And this evidence, as you saw in that trial, because we kept bringing it, didn't we? All the way up to the end. All the way up to the end. More and more and more evidence. More and more evidence. In football, it's called piling on. And when we have the burden of proof, which we should have the burden of proof, because we're the government and we are here asking you to convict them of something, then we need to prove it beyond a reasonable doubt. But like I told you in my opening statements, we're going to prove this to you beyond any doubt. There's zero doubt in this case that they committed premeditated murder. And I'm very confident that every one of you found that when you went back there to deliberate. This aggravating factor, it stands on a substantial volume of premeditation, of evidence of premeditation, of heightened premeditation. This aggravating circumstance alone justifies a sentence of death. This aggravating factor alone in its evil and its wicked nature outweighs any of the suggested mitigation for any of these defendants. Any of them. They conspired, they premeditated as a team, and it applies to each one of them. This aggravator that either Rashad Murphy or Sean Gathright or Davion Murphy was contemporaneously convicted of a felony involving the use or threat of violence to another person. You can take out the previously part. That's another way of proving that. They were convicted of a contemporaneous violent felony when you all came back here with that just verdict finding them, these three defendants, guilty each of 3 counts, not 1, but 3 counts of attempted second-degree murder. And that's exactly what they did. Attempted second-degree murder. That is an aggravating factor that I've kind of broached and talked about a little bit already. They weren't going to just kill Charles Jones. He was the target, no doubt about it. But if there was someone else there, 6 block, they were going to kill him. You saw that in the evidence. So let's talk about each of the people who were affected in those counts. Victim, Gino Norris, 22 years old, not a 6 block member, but a lifetime friend or a lifelong friend of Charles Jones since they were in middle school. He was there to celebrate with Charles. This young man that you saw come in here, this man who talked in low tones, in a subdued voice, and you saw in the evidence when they went up the stairs at Truth 18, he kind of paused and leaned on the banister and waited for everyone else. He was there because he was Charles Jones' friend, not because he was a member of 6 block. But that didn't stop him from catching a round in his arm. Xavier Edwards, the driver of the car, who is a 6 block member, 19 years old at the time, he took multiple rounds into his shoulder. He had grazing wounds on his hands, probably because his hands were up where all of the glass was shattering on the steering wheel. This young man most likely saved not only himself but Gino Norris's life by pressing down on that accelerator and driving through that massive wall of fire in that vortex between Davion Murphy and Sean Gathright's high-powered rifle fire. And then this photograph, because I want to speak about this a little bit. We're going to talk about this. Look at their faces. Look at that. That is from a body-worn camera. That's not a pose. That's in the middle of what's occurring. That's a screenshot from a body-worn camera. Look at the stunned look on Gino's face. And look at the expression on Xavier Edwards. We heard testimony this week about this was a traumatic event. Remember that coming out of Mr. Gathright's mouth? That's trauma right there. That evidence. That's real trauma being reflected in real time as it's being suffered. And we saw these photographs of Xavier Edwards being treated in the hospital for all of his wounds. These men still having projectiles in their bodies. That photographs should be on a horizontal, but that's Gino Norris in the hospital. He was able to go home later that day with his father who came and got him. And this is what I was talking about earlier. Look at the placement of those rounds from Mr. Gathrights rifle, because there's no doubt he's the one that fired those. The one on the right went out the windshield. The one on the left went through this young lady's right arm. Camilla Bentley, 22 years old, completely unrelated to anyone in this case. She's a friend of Miss Albritton's and just happened to be tagging along for the party. And somehow, by some providence, she knew to slip into that front seat. Because I can tell you, if you're looking at this photograph, let me see if I can go backwards. One of those rounds may very well have gone right through her head. Yeah. We have 3 attempted murders in this case, only by the grace of God. And you can see the round coming out of that windshield. And then, this is this, and before I guess I move on to that, let me talk about this aggravator. The fact that these 3 defendants, the Murphys and Mr. Gathright, shot and killed Charles Jones and then attempted to murder these other people who were in the cars, Camilla, Gino, and Xavier Edwards. That is an aggravating factor. That is a violent felony offense that you have convicted them of. And that is an aggravating factor, and there is absolutely zero doubt about it. It's been proven in your verdicts. Your verdicts, you've already found that this aggravator exists beyond a reasonable doubt. That aggravator alone would justify a sentence of death for these 3 defendants, but when you couple it, when you add it, and its weight and significance to the heightened premeditation in this case, there's no comparison. It blots out the mitigation that's been presented to you for those 3 defendants. The first-degree murder was committed by a criminal gang member. Now, I think Mr. Petrides had come up here in his opening and had told you what you all already know. You already basically have found that this is proven by proof beyond a reasonable doubt. The wording that you were given, and that's a sentencing enhancement, is that the crimes were committed by a gang member or associate, because both of those would qualify. You remember the gang detectives talking about there's criteria numbers that have to be met in the Florida statutes for a gang member or for an associate. The state has no doubt that when you deliberated, you found that all of these defendants, other than Mr. Gathright, are gang members. But now you will have to make a finding of that the state has proven beyond any doubt that they are. You will be given the same instructions about the criteria and that so many have to be met. Is that an aggravating factor in this case? So I want to ask you about that. Does common sense say that it is? Because if one of these defendants who was a gang member, let's just take Mr. Chance, just as an example, if he had got into a fight with his girlfriend or found out something about her that he was upset about, and he went out to his car and retrieved a gun, and he loaded it, and he walked around the block, and he cooled off, and he came back and decided he was going to kill her anyways, and he went and murdered her, that would be premeditated murder, and that would be an aggravating factor because he's a gang member. But in that instance, the gang membership would have nothing to do with that murder. It'd be unrelated to that murder, and it'd still be an aggravating factor. But here, this is the heart of this murder. It's the heart of this plot, this plan. All 4 of these defendants share the same motive, to take out Charles Jones because he is in the opposition. Mr. Gathright, we don't have this aggravator against him, but he clearly has allegiances and associations. So it goes to the CCP, the cold, calculated, premeditated aggravator as far as Mr. Gathright. His motive would be relevant to that to show the heightened premeditation. But it is not an aggravator against him. You cannot consider it as such. But these other defendants, yes. It's not only an aggravating factor, it's an essential part of the cold, calculated, premeditated manner that the murder was committed in, because it's their motive. It lays at the heart of this case, and that's what makes it so aggravating. When you couple that, that the reason they're doing this is because they are criminal gang members, and they're taking out an opposition criminal gang member. That's what aggravates this murder. And it applies to these three defendants, the Murphys, and now Mr. Chance. Now Mr. Chance, not Mr. Gathright. And we know what their motive was. We can take it right out of Young and Ace's song that was written and produced and uploaded just a few days after Charles Jones' murder. Davion Murphy, Shug Spaz. Davion Murphy, throwing gang signs. Talk about cold-blooded. They are talking to him about a murder, and he's in there throwing gang signs when they leave him alone. This is a proud gang member. He is a walking billboard of 1200. It's indelibly imprinted all over his body, from the 1200 on the back of his neck and his upper traps, all over his body, with the members of 1200 who have been murdered or killed. Rashad Murphy, sending out the next day, was barely afternoon, and he's posting his motive in this murder, throwing props to Prosper and Junior, Get Back Day. They are the 187 babies. And we all remember what 187 stands for, right? The California statute for murder. You remember this slide, and you see Mr. Murphy. We saw still shots of Mr. Murphy there. He's throwing an upside-down 6 and a bully down sign, and those videos that he was in with numerous other gang members, including Wappa and Spinabins. And then Mr. Chance up on the top left, an ATK member. Mr. Gathright's photo is in there only to show that he is associated to that gang and has allegiance to them. Again, you cannot consider it as an aggravating factor with him. Mr. Chance posts his motive right after the murder. Earlier than Rashad Murphy, we see Tilly, his good friend that was murdered just hours before the attempted murder. He was 18 years old at the time of the offense. His age at the time of the offense, it's kind of duplicating itself. Mr. Gathright has a proposed 32 proposed listed mitigators. Again, the state would just simply encourage you to follow the law, that it's not a numbers game, it's not a calculation. He was raised in a military family with repeated parental deployments resulting in frequent locations and prolonged separations. He was, but look at what he was able to do with that. You heard from his mother, and you heard from his prior stepfather, Mr. Harrington, a wonderful man, the Air Force man. You heard from Mr. Edwards, the counselor at the school that he got to go to, the magnet school, a school that not every kid gets to go to. And they all told you he adjusted. He was resilient. He was able to go from one station to the next and treat it as a new enterprise. Remember what Mr. Harrington told us? That he treated it as a new adventure, a new culture with different people and to meet new people. And he always, his mother told us, adjusted well to that. He was primarily raised by his paternal grandmother due to parental absence and instability. Well, when his parents were deployed serving our country abroad, he did. He lived with Miss Gathright, his paternal grandmother. Again, wonderful people. She's right over there watching. Wonderful people. Her and her husband, who's now gone, wonderful people with a wonderful church community up in Oxford, Mississippi. who came around this young boy and this young man and nurtured him and gave him role models. He always, she told us, had good male role models. And what better male role model than Mr. Harrington? What better role model than that? Did he have some exposure to some abuse or to some violence by his natural father? Yes, he did, but it was limited, and that family made sure of that. They made sure of that. And he didn't just have Miss Gathright. You flip over to the other side of the family. Miss Allen, another wonderful grandmother who told you about the Thanksgiving in New York, and you heard all these little family anecdotes, the things that make families families. Wonderful things. He had a wonderful environment, just like Mr. Chance, but a little bit different with Mr. Gathright. Mr. Gathright had more than just loving, caring people. Mr. Harrington tell you that's his son. He considers it his son. Mr. Edwards going on trips with him and going on a cruise with him and counseling him and staying in contact with him once he got out of the school and went into high school and matriculated up. He got to go to Europe, Scotland, Ireland. He got to go to Spain and take pictures in front of the Eiffel Tower in Paris. And he got to go to South Africa and did humanitarian work there. He got to go to Cape Town, one of the most beautiful cities in the world. He lived in Okinawa, Japan. You heard Mr. Harrington say that, who's a pilot. And he got to fly to all these islands in the archipelago around Okinawa. Imagine that childhood this man had. All the opportunities, all the care, all the support and the love. And the state would ask you to compare it to the despicable and evil actions of this 18-year-old on June 22nd and in the early morning hours of June 23rd as he hunted Charles Jones. He was the driving force in this conspiracy, no doubt about it. Just like Mr. Chance's surveillance, it never could have happened without his participation. He is up to his eyeballs in this conspiracy and murder. He lacked a stable male role model or consistent guidance during formative years. That has not been proven, folks. I'm sorry, that has not been proven. You can't march all of these wonderful people in here and believe that. No way. Those grandmothers and his mother would never have allowed that to happen. He was subjected to verbal abuse by his father. It sounds like he was. It sounds like that's been proven. He was subjected to physical abuse and injury at the hands of his father. Maybe. We have that one story where he ran off and was in a park and his grandmother called him. And they got him out of that situation fairly quickly and moved him back here to the East Coast. He lived in an environment marked by fear, conflict, and lack of safety in his father's home. Maybe, but not for very long. That was intermittent, and it wasn't for more than a few weeks or a month, we heard in the evidence. He struggled with identity formation and belonging in adolescence. I'm not sure we heard anything about that. You may have a better memory than I do. You rely upon the evidence. He experienced isolation and a difficulty adjusting socially after relocation in adolescence. I would suggest the evidence is to the exact contrary of that. He was susceptible to influence due to his age. Did the evidence reveal that that defendant was susceptible to influence or that he was the influencer? Look in the evidence as far as that mitigation, because I don't believe the state would submit to you that has not been proven. His decision-making was influenced by peer groups in an unfamiliar culture. He had been here in Jacksonville for several years. They, I believe maybe in his testimony, tried to paint it as a violent environment that he was dropped into. Look at the evidence. Look at where he lived. Look at the photographs from the search warrants and the photographs of the exterior of that house and that driveway. He lived in the suburbs in a nice area. And you heard in the evidence that he lived in a nice area. He is described as a kind, respectful, and nonviolent by his family. I think they did describe him as such. But the nonviolent and respectful superlatives simply did not apply from June 6th moving forward, folks, through this murder and even afterwards. I'm not sure I would suggest to you, the state would suggest how respectful it is to drop a motor vehicle that's been utilized in a collaborated conspiratorial murder with your elderly grandmother who ends up getting pulled over driving it. He is optimistic and positive, and a positive support for his family and friends. I think that's probably been proven. He loves his sister, nephew's mother. I think that's been proven. He loved deeply by his family who have supported him. That's been proven, as I've already argued to you. He's described as calm, well-mannered, and non-confrontational. Well, he was certainly calm when he was loading that Impala, and he was calm when he was executing this murder along with his co-conspirators. Calm to the point of ice water in his veins. With that type of accuracy he was displaying with that rifle while moving. Trying to remember where I left off. Okay, he has the capacity to contribute positively, maybe, is a son, brother, grandson, and friend whose life has meaning to others. Absolutely. Absolutely, that's been proven to you. And again, you need to assign to that whatever weight you see fit. He has a desired potential to mentor, to influence others. It sounds like he does. He has previously fed the homeless, was involved in community projects in Mississippi when he lived with Miss Gathright. I think that's been proven. He traveled to foreign countries on mission trips for humanitarian purposes. That's been proven. He participated in educational international travel programs with exposure to broader opportunities. Absolutely, absolutely. The environment that Mr. Gathright and Mr. Chance grew up in, very, very similar. Wonderful grandparents, a wonderful and committed mother, wonderful support systems from Mr. Nix for Mr. Chance to Mr. Harrington for Mr. Gathright. But what separates these two defendants is the opportunities and possibly the material well-being of the family that Mr. Gathright grew up in. He lived in Japan. He visited Europe. He had every single opportunity. He went to a magnet school, traveled abroad. He has entrepreneurial initiatives, including running small businesses. Sure, yeah, that's probably, it's definitely proven. If you want to find that mitigating, that's fine. He showed productivity at a young age, demonstrated desire to be productive, engaged in creative, constructive outlets, including photography and media work. At one point in his life, yes, he did, clearly. He has shown resilience, adaptability despite adversity. And see, you see one mitigator here kind of contradicting another, and that's what we heard in the evidence, how resilient and adaptable that this defendant was when he was growing up. Out of necessity, he had to learn to be. He could contribute significantly to the prison workforce. I'm sure he could. I leave that up to you to decide if that has any mitigating weight at all. And the existence of any other factors in Mr. Gathwright's character. So, speaking of the prison thing, I want to talk about Raul Benasco's testimony, because the man who's going to be paid $4,000 or $5,000 to come in here and give us this amazing news that prison is tough. Well, yeah, prison is tough. Life is life. Life without parole. That's a tough sentence. Is it punishment? Because you've heard that kind of all through the beginning of this penalty phase. Life without parole is punishment. Yeah, it's punishment. It certainly is punishment. And a death sentence is punishment. You need to decide what the appropriate sentence is. It's not an issue as to whether it's punishment. It clearly is punishment. It clearly is. And as if he's sentenced to this, on this crime, Mr. Gathright, to life in prison, he will be at a close custody level. There is some modification, Mr. Bonasco told us, could occur to his work and to his living environments, but it's not maximum security death row. It's a different whole ball of wax. You remember the whole air conditioning argument? I think everyone here knows what air conditioning is, and it doesn't exist on death row. The mitigating circumstances applicable to Rashad Murphy, there's 12 of them. He has no significant history of prior criminal activity. That's been proven. That's fine. Mitigating, yeah. His age at the time of the offense, well, he was 30 years old, folks. He was a grown man. I mean, 30 years old. That's not an issue as to whether that's mitigating. That has zero mitigating factor, or zero mitigating weight, the state would suggest to you. That is not a mitigating factor. He has a history of physical and emotional abuse as a child consistent with PTSD. All right, so that's probably the most significant thing that Mr. Murphy has is mitigation, that he actually went into foster care for a couple of years. I think it was 3 years. But there was a real divergence while he was in there, remember? He was placed with some foster family because his mother was a drug addict, and apparently the authorities removed him up in Georgia, at St. Mary's, Georgia, and he went into a foster situation that was not very good, and he saw his little brother being physically abused. And I'm sure that, and I have no doubt, the state has no quarrels or qualms with that being traumatic. That's traumatic as a boy to see that, a stranger beating on your little brother. But we also heard that the whole time that was occurring, his aunt and his grandmother was fighting to get him out of there. They were fighting to get Mr. Murphy, Rashad Murphy, out of that circumstance, he and his brother. And the Georgia authorities were skeptical about it because of what had occurred with the mother, and I think maybe his grandfather had some criminal history way back in the early part of his life, and it was affecting that decision. Meanwhile, he and his brother do, with this woman, Miss Dallas, who his aunt told us was a wonderful foster mother. He couldn't have had a better foster mother, Miss Dallas. She cared for those boys, and when the state came to take them, when her time with them was up, she fought to keep them from being transferred to another foster parent or another foster home. She loved and cared and supported those boys, and his aunt came in here and told us, and we may have heard that from someone else, I don't remember, but another family member may have told us about Miss Dallas. You remember the testimony? She would dress them up and bring them down here when their little sister was performing at church in Jacksonville, drive all the way down from Georgia. She would bring them down there to Jacksonville for family get-togethers. And they thought the world of her. But after about 2 to 3 years, Mr. Murphy went back to his family, went back to that environment that he lived in, which was a loving, caring environment outside of his mother. It was a loving and caring environment that he had. His aunts told you that in their testimony. He had and maintained a loving relationship with his family and friends while he was incarcerated. He absolutely did. He developed religious and spiritual awareness. Well, apparently he has. We saw some certificates where he's been doing that and trying to help out with Bible study. He loves his children, has been a good father to them. It sounds like he has. Sounds like Ms. Steiger told us that. And I know his aunts told us that he loved his children, or does love his children. And again, another aggravator, a numbered one, it talks about him being removed from his home, placed into foster care. The state would tell you that most likely that's the most powerful mitigation he probably has. He has no prior felony convictions. That's true. We stipulated to that. He has displayed appropriate behavior and the ability to follow rules while incarcerated. That's fine. If you want to find that to be mitigating, he's in a controlled environment. And then any other existence of any other factors. The PTSD diagnosis, the state would suggest to you, is somewhat of a skeptical, the state is skeptical of that diagnosis and the evidence in this case. Dr. Collins testified to it and agreed. He, in fact, was looking for the collateral evidence that Dr. Werner examined in this case, the police reports, the interviews, and and that was her discussion about other defendants, not about Mr. Murphy's case, Rashad Murphy. He found evidence that he may suffer from PTSD. But as I pointed out to her in the cross-examination, this defendant not only participated in this conspiracy to commit murder and took all those steps I already walked through with you, all the things that he did to contribute to this, including trying to protect the conspiracy and trying to keep it hidden, which apparently is his forte, the ghost, who didn't appear until they got back to Jacksonville, was able to avoid the cameras. But his role, and the next aggravator I'm going to talk to you about, not only in the heightened premeditation, which clearly he was part of that planning because he's telling them, we have this plan in place that we're going to do, and he needs to stop talking before they figure this out, trying to protect it. His behavior in the actual murder itself, with that fully automatic Glock pistol, that needs to be considered because he's firing that at a fully automatic cyclical rate with Mr. Gathright standing to his right, firing a high-powered rifle at a high, rapid-fire rate. All of that percussion, all of those muzzle flashes, all of that violence occurring, not affecting him at all, not triggering any kind of a PTSD reaction at all. He coolly, calmly runs back to the Impala, almost like he's jogging, keeping his head turned towards the Charger as it flees, gets back into the Impala, and they flee back to the Airbnb, and then he's posting up, get back day. And lastly, Davion Murphy. May I have one moment to consult, Your Honor?
Yes.
So, Mr. Davion Murphy has suggested 13 mitigating circumstances. I'll try to move through these as fast as possible. The capacity of Davion Murphy to appreciate the criminality of his conduct or to conform his conduct to the requirements of law was substantially impaired. Absolutely not. That has been absolutely disproven. Everything about this case tells you that he knew the criminality. He wouldn't be hiding his identity if he didn't know the criminality of his conduct. Everything about this shows planning. It shows advanced thought, purposeful action, him pursuing the Charger, remember, and firing the rounds down the west side of the hotel at the Charger. Nothing about this supports that, and Dr. Werner confirmed it in her expert psychiatric opinion. He does not meet that. The felony was committed while he was under the influence of extreme mental or emotional disturbance. No, that was completely disproven. Dr. Werner told you, no. He doesn't suffer from any emotional disturbance or extreme mental disturbance. His age at the time of the offense, he was in his mid to late 20s. I think he was 26. He was in his late to mid 20s. He suffers from traumatic brain injury. I'm just going to echo the words of the last doctor you just heard testify, a Yale-educated, board-certified diagnostic radiologist who's been looking at MRIs for his entire career for decades. Absolutely not. No. There's no brain damage in Mr. Davion Murphy's brain. He was exposed to repeated violence in his childhood and young adult life. There's no evidence of that, folks, for Davion Murphy. None. His mother, Miss Beeks, a wonderful mother, described as a wonderful mother. When asked by Dr. Werner, the state's own expert, last Saturday, tell me about your childhood. I had a great childhood. I had a good mother. And we saw that in the record evidence that Dr. Eisenstein testified about that was provided to him by Ms. Toomey, by Mr. Davion Murphy's attorneys. And we saw it in the records, the things she did for her son, the things she tried to do, moving him to a different, getting him out of the 8th grade because he was having all of this conduct issues, which was the support for Dr. Warner's conduct disorder diagnosis, the precursor to antisocial personality disorder. Get him out of the public schools, put him into that Christian academy, and sure enough, what happens? He graduates from 8th grade. It helps him. Later, he fails 11th grade, and he ends up in the Jacksonville Youth Academy, where he has to go to school, and he finishes 11th grade. And then what happens? His mother, who kicked him out of the house because she had exercised some tough love, which takes a lot of love, for any parent knows that. It takes a lot of love to kick your son out or kick your daughter out when they're doing something like that and not being accountable. He was skipping, smoking, gambling, getting into all kinds of trouble at school. She kicked him out of the house, and he went to live with his one of his grandmothers. But in 12th grade, after he graduates or gets through 11th grade, she goes and petitions the high school there in Jacksonville and gets him back into school, and he finishes his 12th grade year. He doesn't graduate with his class. He later gets his special diploma for high school. There was no violence in his childhood. This is a young man who learned how to work. He learned how to work a 9-to-5 job, and we saw that in the evidence. All the jobs he held for months and months and months. In fact, he taught his younger brother, who was transported down here from prison to testify for his older brother, and told you, he taught me how to work a 9-to-5 job. He taught me how to be responsible. And what else did that young man tell you about his older brother? That Davion, at 8th grade, 13, 14 years old, when his mother had to be hospitalized, when Miss Beeks had to go in the hospital, this defendant takes over. He takes over the household. He takes over the chores and making sure the other siblings do the chores and keep the house up to the standards that are Miss Beeks' standards. He cooks for his siblings. This defendant, just like the other defendants, had a loving environment around him with caring mothers, caring people, other than Rashad Murphy's mother. I wouldn't put her into that class, apparently. He's not in the borderline range of intellectual disability. He's in the low average range, but not in a range that disables him or keeps him from being able to work or keeps him from being able to recognize the fact that he needs to avoid the Ring camera at the Airbnb the day before, or keeps him from understanding that when they're committing this murder, in order to keep the victim from knowing they're there and taking off and fleeing, that he needs to conceal himself and hide behind the cars and take up a position. Because you remember, he was the backup singer in this performance. He was the backup shooter to prevent flight as a hedge against the victim escaping. And he sure fulfilled that, didn't he? He came out of the shadows with those giant fireballs coming out of that 300 blackout. And it didn't prevent him from understanding that he needed to hide his identity. He needed to wear dark clothes to stay camouflaged in the darkness of that night, and he needed to hide his identity with a ski mask. You didn't really probably need Dr. Warner to tell you all of that. Davion Murphy grew up in a household marked by instability and financial strain. I don't know about the instability. There probably was financial strain. I think that the young man yesterday from the prison told us when he was being questioned, you know, it's not like we were living in some mansion or something. So yeah, I mean, it was a caring, loving environment, but, you know, we didn't have a lot of money. He didn't have a stable male role model in his life. Maybe. His father was diagnosed with schizophrenia. Well, his father really wasn't in his life. His father was in prison for a lot of his life. You heard his uncle who came in and testified about Davion's upbringing. His father was incarcerated for life when he was 12 years old. Yeah, is that mitigating? Probably. Yeah, I'm sure that had some effect on him when he was a boy to lose his father like that to prison. He took on a parental role. Well, we just talked about that. That basically contradicts the mitigator that he has borderline range of intelligence. He's loved by his family, no doubt about that. No doubt about that. And the existence of any other factors. I want to go back real quick before I leave Rashad Murphy. Because, folks, unlike the guilt phase of this trial, I'm not going to have a rebuttal argument. I'm not going to get up here again. The way this works, since we are seeking to have you sentence these defendants to death and their lives are on the line or at play, their attorneys, and the state doesn't quarrel with this at all. We don't quarrel with this. They get the last word, all right? They get the last word. But I want to talk about Rashad Murphy one more time. There was something I didn't speak about earlier that was significant in that mitigation. His aunt told us that the grandmother and the aunts wanted to help him to pursue his passion. That Rashad Murphy was a successful football player. He excelled. And they let him go to live with a relative in New Jersey to play on this team up there, this high school team, to give him that opportunity to go up there. She said there was a video, and I think you all probably know what they're talking about. They make videos of highlights to try to get kids into college on scholarships. That's what these people did for that young man. That's how loving and caring they were. I just wanted to mention that before I forgot about it. When you're considering the weight of these mitigating factors, please consider what's also been proven alone in the mitigating factors, that all of these defendants had people in their lives that loved them, cared about them, that were role models for them. They never went without that. None of them did. Both the Murphys, Mr. Gathright, Mr. Chance, Mr. Gathright and Mr. Chance, both of them had every opportunity to grow up to be productive men and citizens. So I want to talk to you about weighing aggravating circumstances versus mitigation. Well, I'll come back to that in a minute because I want to talk about this aggravator, and I've been up here for quite a while. These three defendants, the three shooters, knowingly created a great risk of death to many persons. Knowingly created a great risk of death to many persons. And I want to go through this with you one more time, and I'll try to be quick. Look at where Mr. Rashad Murphy is firing that fully automatic Glock pistol. He's not just firing it in the direction of that charger. Right behind it lays Armani Turner's Hyundai with Miss Randolph in it and Mr. Howard in the back seat. He knows that his rounds may go anywhere over there. He's creating and knowingly creating a great risk of death to many people. He knows that there's people in that other car, the Altima. That doesn't stop him from firing. And when they came into this parking lot and drove all the way around that whole complex, every one of those defendants that were involved in the shooting, the Murphys and Mr. Gathright, saw all of the cars parked in the parking spots. And we know from the evidence that hotel was full of people. And all of them knew it. And Mr. Murphy, look at the indiscriminate firing into multiple cars with all these party goers. Has that been proven beyond a reasonable doubt? Absolutely it has, as it pertains to Mr. Murphy and that fully automatic pistol that he's shooting 31 rounds out of. You see the impacts here to this car. It's the state's assertion to you that is now Mr. Gathright's rifle fire coming in, and we know the 2 rounds coming out of Mr. Jones' bodies come from that rifle that Mr. Gathright has fired. And again, I pointed out to you earlier, watch the rear window of the Altima. Lights come on. Camilla Bentley's trying to get out of there. You heard her in her testimony. As soon as a car moves, first impact. Second impact. 2 impacts. That is Mr. Gathright, Sean Gathright. He fired that AR-15 into that Dodge Charger, and then he redirects directly into that Altima. And as far as he knows from his position at Truth 18, there are many people, at least 3 in that car. Tafa McCrae and Miss Albritton and Miss Camilla Bentley. And that didn't stop him from firing into that car, into both of these cars. He knows Gino Norris or Xavier Edwards is in that Charger. We're talking about multiple people being fired upon here. A knowing commission of great risk to many people of death. Absolutely, it's been proven in this evidence. And if you look at the next video, let me move to it real quick. First of all, I guess we can look at these people that were being affected by all of this. Miss Turner, Miss Randolph, Mr. Howard in the back seat. Tafa and Aaliyah are now in the lobby using the restroom, but these 3 don't know that because they've been around the corner hiding. And they left to go into the lobby. When they went in there, it wasn't at a time that the cruise was driving by with Mr. Chance to be able to tell them that. So as far as they knew, these cars had all of these people in them. Then the other video of the shooting. Okay, Mr. Gathright is now firing into the Charger. Watch his muzzle of that rifle. Right there. He turns and redirects his fire into the Altima. No hesitation. None. He knows he's firing into cars that hold multiple people, and there's absolutely zero hesitation on his part. No cause for concern. Continues to fire until now the Charger starts to move. You see its headlights in the lower left corner. He's still firing into that car. And now comes the Charger, so he redirects fire into them. Now, beyond these cars is 40th Street McKinley. 40th Street McKinley, a busy road, and he's firing towards that road. Indiscriminate, with impunity, doesn't really care about anyone that could potentially be driving over there. Continues to fire, and then is firing there at the car as it's going north. His fire is going northwest. If you remember in the evidence, and you can see where the Home to Suites is. I'm sure you all are familiar with this. You've looked at it for weeks. But you remember, if you look at the direction just to the left on the bottom of the portico, you can see the tree at the end of that little island. You can see the handicap spot where the Lexus was parked at the time. Mr. Gathright is directing his fire at that Charger as it's passing him, and he's firing now to the northwest, right in the direction of that La Quinta Inn, where Pedro Gabor was staying with his wife and his 10-year-old son and his 6-year-old daughter, here from Ocala to go to the Lowry Park Zoo, And Mr. Gathright, he doesn't care. He's not stopping. There's no cause for concern. He's opening up with a .556 NATO caliber high-powered rifle, and he's firing it directly into the path of that Holiday Inn and that La Quinta Inn. And we know that was a high-powered round that went through that air conditioning unit, through that brick wall, coursed across that room, and struck Pedro Gabor's wife in the ankle, and it was stinging her. She didn't know what it was. And then it was his little boy the next morning that found it, the one piece of projectile. Later, a uniformed officer went in there and recovered more from that round. That didn't stop Mr. Gathright. Mr. Gathright was firing indiscriminately right towards all of this densely packed humanity. Having driven around that parking lot and seen all those cars, knowing that this is a hotel complex, you saw the big signs outside. There's no mistaking where they were. And that's in addition to all the rounds that he and Rashad Murphy pumped into those cars towards these party goers and friends. And now we get to Mr. Davion Murphy. Who incidentally is not going to be reflected on this, but when he comes out of the shadows by that yellow Bronco on one side and the Mercedes SUV on the other, he's firing into the Dodge Charger, but he's also firing directly in towards the hotel. Sean Gathright was directing fire into that hotel, and we saw that there were windows shattered in the front of the hotel at the entrance of the hotel. Could have been anybody in that hotel behind those windows. And that's just in the front of the hotel. Look what he's doing here. Look at what he's doing there. He is firing. He's firing directly up to the left in that image of that hotel. Straight up there. Pushing those rounds rapidly with that firearm that he has no stock on it, right? And he's firing it directly to the northeast. Up that corridor where the Charger is fleeing. He didn't care. It didn't stop him to think that there are hotel rooms lining that west side of the hotel. And we heard Audra Agramonte tell us. Remember her? The woman who came here from Palm Beach County with her husband and her daughter and her daughter's boyfriend. They had put the daughter into, or checked her into her dorm for summer session at USF at the University of South Florida. And her and her husband and the daughter's boyfriend are in the room, and they hear all this shooting, and then a round flies through the window and cuts across the room, the boyfriend grabbing her and pulling her to the ground. That defendant it didn't stop him at all, the fact that this was a packed hotel. He's firing indiscriminately down the edge of that hotel. I just want to point out one thing, and it really shouldn't be any of your all's concern at this point. You heard a question asked of Dr. Eisenberg whether Davion Murphy is right or left-handed, and they said he's left-handed. Okay, that had nothing to do with Dr. Eisenstein's opinions in this case. Zero to do with it. All right. So one thing you can be assured of in this case is that your guilty verdict rests on mountains of evidence. There should be no doubt in your mind. That's already been proven. That's already been proven. But it's clear in that video that Mr. Murphy is holding the gun with his right hand, not his left hand, and there's a reason for that. Because if he used his left hand, there's nowhere to put his right hand because of the brass catcher. He'd be right up on the muzzle if he did that. There's a reason he's using his right hand. It's out of necessity. And of course, we know Mr. Murphy, he's not embarrassed, he's not shy, and obviously zero remorse over what he did, his role in this case, because he's reenacting it in the interview room, mocking the police with what he did. That aggravating factor alone, placing many people at great risk and knowingly placing many people at great risk of death. Think about that. Think about how heinous that is. How heinous that is. That you're going to treat all the people in that hotel, all the party goers, as just fodder. They're just fodder for these killers because they're going to kill Charles Jones no matter what. And that's why they brought that overwhelming amount of firepower, and they were going to lay down a barrage, a wall of lead. And anyone that got in the way, it didn't matter to them. It didn't make them hesitate. They had zero reservations in the evidence about that. And that is an aggravating factor. That is an aggravating factor. When you couple that for these three defendants, the Murphys and Mr. Gathright, with the other aggravating factors in this case, the cold, calculated, premeditated fashion this murder was committed in, there is absolutely no contest between the state's aggravating factors and these mitigating factors that have been presented to you. None. The law on weighing aggravators versus mitigation. First, you decide what value, what significance. In light of this case and how it applies to the sentence, what significance does that mitigation have? The aggravation, all of it is powerful in its significance. The state would suggest to you that every aggravating factor is a powerful factor as it relates specifically to this case and these defendants' individual actions. You have to do the same with the mitigation. You have to go through and determine, number one, has it been proven? Number two, what weight does that have to me and my decision making in this case? Does it have significant weight? Does it have great weight? And then ultimately, it's up to you to decide, and it's not a numbers game. It's not a numbers game. It's a quality game. It's the quality of the aggravation. Now, you have to decide, does the state's aggravation outweigh their mitigation? Because if it doesn't, then your job is done. Your personal decision is done. You check off life. That's your vote. If it does outweigh the mitigation, then you can sentence them to death. You remember that all the way back to jury selection. And it's the state's suggestion to you, each of you individually, that the aggravating factors in this case prove to you, they should prove to each and every one of you that the just verdict and just sentence in this case is one of death for each of them. For each of them. I want to go back to the cold part of the cold, calculated, premeditated. We talked a lot about the premeditation. We talked a lot about all the individual steps. I've discussed with you all of the problem solving that went on. But I want you to consider how cold-blooded a conspiracy that lasts for weeks is. How cold-blooded that is. Look at the accuracy and the efficiency with which Sean Gathright operated in this murder, with which Davion Murphy operated. No hesitation at all in anything that Mr. Davion Murphy did. From the time he came out of that car all masked up, had his mask on, had his disguise on, keeping himself hidden away in the shadows until the appropriate time when he came out and started unleashing those fireballs of gunfire. And then to turn and pursue, and that tenaciousness and that purposefulness, and then to immediately turn after firing and go back immediately to flee and to get away. All of this with all of those defendants. Rashad Murphy, too. It doesn't just suggest that they all had ice water in their veins. It suggests that they all were acting with cold-blooded lack of any kind of emotion. This was just simple business. From loading that Impala to the way and the manner in which this murder happened, it was all business. They acted as a team effort. You know, this kind of premeditation that you see in this case, this is the kind of teamwork and premeditation that puts rockets in space, folks. That's what this is, and the kind of problem solving. But when you want to talk about coldness and cold-blooded, we already saw the social media posts from Mr. Chance and Mr. Murphy. Don't forget about this. This was right around noon. Mr. Chance comes out of that front door. He's got a celebratory drink in his hand. He walks out. The moving truck is unrelated. That's dealing with the next door neighbors. But he comes out with that drink in his hand. And then he's posting this. He's putting up posts of him standing with his drink. And look at the timestamps. Look at that. That's like around 11 o'clock, 3:31 UTC minus 4 hours, 11:30. What is that, 16 or 1856 So right around 2 o'clock UTC, right before they left, he's drinking, he's celebrating, and putting up posts online. And then we go back, finally, just to touch upon this one more time, to the conversation, the conspiratorial conversation that's occurring weeks before this between Rashad Murphy and Sean Gathright, the 18-year-old. We got to stop Chance from giving us away, from revealing what we're doing. Get on there and stop him. And they agree to do that. We talked about the business-like attitude of Mr. Gathright and Mr. Chance. We've looked at that video, so I'm not going to go through it again. Folks, back in my opening statement, I told you that during this trial and the guilt phase that we were going to reach out into the darkness of the early mornings of June 23rd, 2024, and we were going to drag that conspiracy in here and reveal it under the lights of this courtroom, the bright lights of truth. And that's exactly what we did in this case. That's what the evidence in this case did. It showed and revealed the underbelly of this evil, wicked, pernicious plan. But it was more than that. You know, I talked to you earlier about piling on in our evidence. There must have come a time in the last week of the state's case where you all must have been thinking, man, when is this going to end? We've heard enough. This is well beyond a reasonable doubt. When is it going to end? When's this evidence going to end? It just keeps coming. And I wouldn't blame you for having that thought, because it did. Because along with us dragging that conspiracy in, it was like a dump truck coming in here and earth movers just pushing in this mountain of premeditation. You know, and it really, the way it ended up being here when we were in guilt phase closing statements was like we were all floating around in this ocean, literally an ocean of premeditation. Literally. That's how much evidence there is in this case. And just like those fireballs coming out of that 300 blackout in that early morning right there by the portico of the Home to Suites from Davion Murphy's gun that were so bright, even in that ambient lighting of that parking lot, just like that, this evidence shines brightly. It can't be avoided. It can't be hidden from. No hoodie, no COVID masks are going to hide the defendants from this aggravation. There are no Ubers here to whisk anyone away from your sentence in this case. There is a mountain of evidence proving these aggravating factors. I point that out to you because it gives you, each of you, this benefit. When you go back there and you're deliberating and you're voting on what the appropriate sentence is for each one of these defendants, it gives you the assurance. It gives each of you the knowledge deep down, that your sentence is based upon not just a rock, like it says in the scriptures, not just a rock. It's based and it sits on this giant, enormous mountain of evidence of premeditation, evidence of creating great risk to many people, and the gang membership that lies at the heart of this case. All of these aggravators, there are mountains and heaps of evidence that prove it. None of you should walk out of here after you enter your sentences and your votes. None of you should have any qualms or doubts about doing so, because you can go home and you'll know that night in your heart that your vote to sentence these defendants to death, your vote stands on that evidence and that assurance. And you can have that assurance that night. You can be assured of that, of the correctness and the justness of that sentence of death the next day, through the weekend, into next week, into next month. For the rest of your lives, you can know that your sentences in this case are just and right sentences, I quoted earlier from the book, To Kill a Mockingbird, from Atticus Finch, describing in his closing statements that the courts are the great leveler. The courts are the great leveler. I want to quote another writer, a writer from the 19th century, from the 1800s, Robert Louis Stevenson, who wrote those wonderful books, Treasure Island, I don't want to misstate, The Strange Case of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, stories that we've all heard in our lives. He was a great writer. He was a poet. He was a national hero in Scotland and is still revered there today. But he's also known for this quote: eventually, everybody sits down to a banquet, a banquet of consequences. And today, each of these defendants, all of them sitting over here, are sitting in this courtroom for their banquet. The state of Florida stands before you and requests that each and every one of you go back there and vote to sentence each of these defendants to death for the murder of Charles Jones, for the murder of this man, that you sentence each of them to death, knowing that it is the just and it is the right sentence in this case.
The jury is ended.
Okay, very good. Welcome back, members of the jury. We are ready to proceed. And Ms. Finkelstein, on behalf of Sean Gathright, you may proceed.
Thank you, Your Honor. Good morning. Members of the jury, we have come a long way since you were selected a little bit over 3 weeks ago, and now we have reached the most demanding part of this trial. In just a little while, the fate of Sean Gathright is going to be out of our hands and into yours. If you remember back to jury selection, there was a lot of numbers, scales, questions posed to you over and over, and I told you at that time I wasn't going to hold you to those numbers. Some of us said we didn't really like the numbers. It was just kind of getting a feel for where you guys stand coming into a new scenario. And the reason I said that was because this isn't a test. This isn't a numbers game, not a math problem or an equation. This is most literally a life or death scenario. Soon you will have to decide whether a young 20-year-old man will spend the rest of his life in prison or whether he will be executed. Sean Gathright is not wicked. Sean Gathright is not evil. No matter how many times, no matter how many ways it could be said in the state's closing, he's not a mastermind. He's not a super coordinator or orchestrator. Apparently, he might even be a rocket scientist. The state can minimize or diminish the mitigation list that's in front of you. The state may think that something deserves weight or no weight. That doesn't matter. That decision lies with each and every one of you. The state's opinion or theory is just that. This part of the trial, as I told you in opening, is about the defendants, about Sean Gathright, and it's about each one of you. On several occasions, I heard Mr. Harmon, when he was reading some of the mitigating factors that are on there, say, you can find that mitigating, that's fine. But lucky for you, you don't need permission. You can evaluate that mitigation exactly how you feel fit. Each and every one of them. This is your decision, a personal decision, and you never, under any circumstance, have to vote for death. In the state's close, Mr. Harmon presented a very strong case for why you should find Mr. Gathright guilty. You've already done that. That part's over. Went pretty hard on Mr. Gathright and painted him out as a person who led this whole thing. We wouldn't be here without him. That's his theory, and my theory is that's done to lessen the mitigation. That was done to convince you that what you saw and what you heard from this witness stand this last week from Mr. Gathright's mouth himself shouldn't be given the significant weight that it deserves. But what it actually did was prove that a kid with no motive, no involvement, no history in that, can get wrapped up in a culture that he has no business in. The evidence was overwhelming that Mr. Gathright's life has, and always will have value. Mr. Gathright is a human being worth saving. Even in prison. People may think, well, you're in there for life or death, does it matter? You're in there. Yes, because you heard from Mr. Bonasco all the different ways that you can be useful, not only to the state from a financial perspective, if that matters, but to other people in prison, out of prison, his family that supports him no matter what, sits in here and listens every day. You heard what a positive, optimistic person he is from friends, family, guidance counselors. He can be a light in a dark place. Hopefully he can keep making people smile. Even now, from jail, you heard that he's still asking about other people when he talks to them, trying to keep them in good spirits while he's sitting in jail. While he is facing a death sentence, he's worried about other people. That's not wicked. That's not evil. The theme from those witnesses on Mr. Gathright's behalf was he was positive, he was funny, he was witty, he made people feel good. You heard that he was kind and respectful and well-mannered. And you don't just have to take the word of family and friends that know him and, of course, want to come in and they want to save him, they want to help him. You saw it from Mr. Gathright. That young man had the courage to get up there and face you and talk to you and try the best he could to explain his remorse, his accountability, and his worth. And when he was questioned on cross-examination and tried to get riled up, he remained respectful. That's his character. That wasn't a show. He was authentic. He was real. He was honest. He didn't get riled up. He answered every question politely, with sir at the end, from someone who was cross-examining him pretty harshly, and who was seeking to have you vote to take his life away. He remained respectful because that's who he is inside. That doesn't change. Now, is that the reason that you should not give somebody a death penalty? Well, that's up to you. And that's why it's your choice. But what it is, along with the other testimony you heard, is that proof that good kids, good people, privileged kids, I guess we want to call them, educated, intelligent, worldly, that those types of kids, Sean Gathright was not isolated or insulated or immune from getting wrapped up in something that he had no business in. He's an 18-year-old kid who is not immune from outside influence, curiosity. He told you himself, yes, I had a privileged life. I had people that loved me. I got to travel. I saw things. I did things. I had opportunity. And I still, after leaving that bubble, saw parts of Jacksonville, parts of a culture that I didn't know were out there. And look where he finds himself. That curiosity from that 18-year-old kid brought him right here. You know, the state said, oh, Mr. Bonasco, who testified, the prison expert, said Mr. Gathright was mature. I think everybody did. I think you can see it for yourself. He's mature. He appeared mature for his age. Well, Mr. Bonasco is basing that on a conversation at the jail for, I think it was a little over an hour. But either way, because he worked, traveled, helped support himself, cared for others, went to school, presented himself as grown, can take care of himself, that might be mature for an 18-year-old. But he's still 18. Maturity on the outside is not the same thing as being a developed adult and having life experiences, having knowledge, having street smarts. It's not the same thing. You can be well-spoken and smart and mature and still make really bad decisions. He is impressionable. He's naive. He was curious. He told you he was easily influenced. That matters. He told you himself that he was more vulnerable to influence and more likely to follow others, probably based on his lack of seeing other aspects of the culture, other aspects of Jacksonville. And we heard that it's pretty rough there. Because he was 18, he was less capable of kind of stopping and saying, wait, maybe this isn't taking me where I need to go, and seeing the end result. He doesn't have that experience or that knowledge. He told you that while he had male influences and guidance in his life, at the times that he felt it really mattered. When Brian Harrington, his stepfather, who was a great guy, divorced his mother 2020. Sean Gathright was only 15. So from 15 till he lands in jail at 18, he didn't have a steady, constant influence in his life when he needed it the most. He's not saying he didn't have anybody. He's not saying all the people that come here to support him and love him weren't really there. They were. But he's a kid. He's feeling his way through things. And it wasn't constant, and it wasn't there for him at those years. And that fact doesn't excuse any conduct. It doesn't remove accountability, but it explains how a young person with so much promise can make a catastrophic decision that could define the rest of his life. That one decision. And I told you in opening that mitigation isn't an excuse. I'm not up here to make excuses for Sean Gathright, and he wasn't making excuses for himself. He wasn't blaming anybody. It's an explanation, and it's a reason. And that's what mitigation is all about. It helps to understand what I'm sure everyone is wondering is how he got here. It's his story. He took accountability. He showed remorse. Remorse is defined as deep and painful and often long-lasting feelings of guilt, sadness or regret for past wrongdoing. Not at the moment. Most people don't feel remorse while they're doing something wrong. They feel it afterwards. And that's what you saw. That wasn't contrived. That wasn't fake. That wasn't for your benefit. It took a lot for him to get up there. And he wanted to. Accountability is obligation or the willingness, which you saw, to accept responsibility and account for one's actions. And that's exactly what he did. He was straightforward. He was composed. He was wholly authentic. And he told you, what led him there, what his curiosity did to him. And you had heard from Maurice Edwards. The state tried to say, he never, one of the mitigators was about, him, his instability or not being able to adapt. And Maurice Edwards did tell you that at a younger age, being that he had some experiences and that Sean traveled and was not as steady in a place, he has a biracial family, that he did feel some sense of instability. Where do I belong? Where do I fit in? And of course you're going to. You're traveling all over. Yes, you're seeing great things, but he's still a kid. And he admits, Mr. Gathright told you, stepped foot in the jail and immediately thought, where did my path veer? And instead of feeling sorry for himself, getting down on himself for this situation that he and nobody else that you heard from saw coming, he cracked his Bible. He told you he talked to God. And he's trying to make the best of a situation that he finds himself in. He said something that I felt was pretty profound, that he said, people are always asking God for something, praying to God to give them something or do something for them. And he thought, I can ask God what he wants from me. So even in this situation, he can be a light. He can help people. He can try and turn lives around for kids that he comes into contact with, or adults. In a dark, dark place, he sees hope. He sees a future. And I'm up here asking you to see that future for him. See the hope in him. See the redemption in him. A lot of the questions of our mitigation witnesses and then some of the state's closing was thinking, he's a privileged kid, he had it all. Does that mean he's not worth saving? I would submit to you that it's the absolute opposite. There's a long list of mitigating factors that you'll have in your instructions, and the state went over a lot of them. I think there's 32 for Mr. Gathright. I'm not going to read them all to you right now. But you'll have them when you deliberate. And it's a long list for a reason. It's a long list because in his short 20 years, 18 when this happened, he really made an impression on this world. So it's a long list. Imagine what he could have done if he had more than 18 years. And remember, that's just a list that we're providing you. Mitigation can be absolutely anything that you want. Anything you heard in the first phase, anything you heard in this phase, or just because you don't think that this young man deserves to die. The law says that you can find those aggravators that the state proved to you in the first phase, reminded you of yesterday. You can find that those were proven. You can find that they outweigh the mitigators, and you never have to sentence someone to death. The death penalty in this phase is not whether to punish, but how. It's not about whether Mr. Gathright will die in prison, but about when and by what means. Natural causes are at the hands of the government. The death penalty is not appropriate in this case. Mr. Gathright does not deserve the death penalty. This is the only time you have to make this decision. You can't change it tomorrow. You can't change it next week. This is it. A vote for life does not excuse any criminal behavior. It's not an excuse. It doesn't excuse responsibility for a crime. A vote for life doesn't diminish the life of Charles Jones or the loss to his family or his loved ones. A vote for life in this case is the just decision. It's the right decision for Mr. Gathright. Do not define Sean Gathright by the worst decision, the worst moment of his life. Sean Gathright is a son who's worth saving. He's a friend worth saving. He's a nephew worth saving. He's a grandson that's worth saving. He's a baby brother worth saving. He's an uncle worth saving. I'm asking you to do just that. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Mr. Petridis. On behalf of Isaiah Chance.
Please, the court. I want to thank you again. You're going to get a lot of thank yous today, and they're well deserved. We are at the end of your service, but as I said in my opening, we are also probably at the most difficult part of your service, and we all understand that. I want to start by saying justice will be served. Isaiah Chance will spend the rest of his life in prison, punished away from society. All we are asking is that you spare his life. Death is never required. The death penalty exists for the worst of the worst. We submit that Isaiah Chance is not that. As I said, he will pay for this crime every day for the rest of his life. We are asking you to let him have that life. This is going to be a conversation about life, a request on behalf of a young man and his family, Isaiah Chance, someone from Jacksonville, lived with his mother, who sat in his grandmother's lap, who called his father all the time, went to Atlanta to be with his grandparents. A man with 3 children. That's who you are deciding about today. A man who spent every day of his life working harder than those around him, just trying to keep up and working harder to make it seem like he wasn't doing that. You heard from 6 people and a doctor, 6 people who love him and a doctor from that chair, and they told you who he is. They're asking for you to believe them and to listen to them. The law gives you this phase of the trial for a reason. You have decided guilt. We are past that. They ask you to decide who Isaiah Chance is and who he is and how he got to be that if he's worth saving. As Ms. Finkelstein said, mitigation does not excuse. Mitigation explains. I'm asking you to look at Isaiah Chance, a full human being, and decide whether death is appropriate, if death is the answer. And death, we would argue, is never necessary. You heard from his entire family during the penalty phase, and like I said, a doctor. 7 different witnesses from 7 somewhat different vantage points, but all told you essentially the same thing. From Victoria Gray, she described his mother. She described him as quiet, gentle, close with his family, never violent. Someone who really didn't want to play football, who had goals, who wanted to be a merchant seaman, an entrepreneur, who was trying to build something. She told you him and his entire family had hobbies, I think she said martial arts, that they would do together because they loved each other and they genuinely wanted and loved to be around each other. Think about her, what it takes to raise 6 children, not on her own, but in large part on her own, in Jacksonville, and each one of them know that they are loved. Isaiah Chance clearly knew he was loved by his mother. He told you that himself through his interviews with the doctors, Told you that by how he acted with his father, how he acted with his grandparents, how he acted with his children. He got that from his mother. She gave that to him. Didn't come from nowhere. You heard from Isaiah Chance Sr., a United States Marine, who after serving came back to Jacksonville, who after getting divorced from his mother stayed in his child's life, stayed in Isaiah Chance's life. When he would help him with his schoolwork, he saw him struggling. And he said, hey, you know, it reminded him of himself. You're like me. I struggled. Keep going. I see you. Not an excuse, but just, I see you work. I see you working. He told you something else. He said that Isaiah called him all the time. And every time he hung up the phone, he said the same thing beforehand. He said, I love you, to his dad. Every single time. Something so ingrained, it was subconscious or subconscious, but he said it. No one's listening when you're talking to your father on the phone. It's not performative. It's just something you do. And he decided at some point, like I said, maybe subconsciously, that every time he talked to his dad, he wanted to let his dad know that he loved him. That is not something, again, that he decided to do performatively. That just shows you that's him as a son. He heard from his grandmother, Elizabeth Jordan, Nana, I think she said. She said he used to sit in her lap when he was a baby, and if he could, he would do it today. She told you that her and Papa used to take them, the grandchildren, on vacation and take them to church. They were there for the grandchildren, and when they needed Isaiah, he was there for them. She told you when Papa was sick, he was, I believe, 7 days he was in a coma. Isaiah Chance didn't call and see how he was doing. He didn't text and see how he was doing. He showed up. He stayed at the hospital until he woke up. And then when they needed someone, when Papa wanted to go home to be with his wife in Atlanta, she couldn't care for him on his own. They called Isaiah Chance, and he showed up time after time. I think it's, like a 5-hour drive from Jacksonville to Atlanta? And he made it over and over again for years to be with his grandparents, to help take his 260-pound grandfather out of bed when his grandmother couldn't, when he was 19, 20, and 21. When most kids are thinking only about themselves, Isaiah Chance realized that when family calls, you show up, and he did that. I think that's an important part of Isaiah Chance and who he is, someone with value. And I ask you to remember that as you deliberate. You heard from Michelle Smith, his godmother. Knew him, she said, before he was born. Had a good relationship with him, and she said she would always tell him the truth. That's AC kicking on, thankfully. She supported.
I'm sorry to interrupt you. It sounds like the AC has kicked on, so Mr. Petraeus, just if you could try and
Yeah,
just give us now. It sounds like a windstorm over there. So
it's a good thing, though.
yes, it is a good thing.
And you heard from Nashawn Nix, his former stepfather, his mentor. And he was someone I thought was a very important witness. He's not blood related to Isaiah Chance or his mother, obviously. Didn't have to be here. He was in Isaiah's life from 7 to 12, so a little while ago. And he built an organization whose entire purpose was identifying young men who can be reached and investing in them. And he saw many that couldn't be reached. And he showed up here. He told you when he was with Isaiah, he noticed things. He would go to school meetings. He would talk to him after school. He would talk to his guidance counselor. He noticed things the family saw as well. He was pushing for tutoring, for structure, and for support. And years later, after he was out of Isaiah's life, no longer with his mother, Isaiah Chance needed a letter of recommendation to be a merchant seaman. And he went to Mr. Nix. And Mr. Nix saw something in Isaiah Chance, and he put his reputation on the line, and he wrote that letter of recommendation for him. That's not obligation. That is not sentiment. It's a man who spent his career learning to see who people are, and he saw something in Isaiah Chance, and we're asking that you see the same thing. You heard from Miss Wade. She's known him from about when he was 16 years old to when he was becoming an adult. She said when she needed someone to house sit, when she needed someone to pet sit, and anyone who knows pets knows that that's a serious obligation, someone to let someone else watch their pet. She called Isaiah Chance. She never had any issues. She never had any trust issues. He did it every time. That's not someone you let do that unless you genuinely trust that nothing will happen. And she told you he would talk to her about his plans for life, specific plans, his goals, what he wanted to accomplish. And she plans to stay in touch with him while he's in prison. Tells you everything about what kind of person inspires that kind of loyalty. 6 witnesses, 6 different relationships, telling you 6 different years of Isaiah Chance's life, different eras, all telling you the same thing. He was quiet, respectful, gentle, loving, nonviolent. A young man who needed a little more structure than the world gives to most people. Then there's the science. Dr. Tracy Hardig, forensic psychologist. She spent hours with Isaiah Chance. She did actual IQ and academic testing. She reviewed school records going back to when he was in preschool. But before that, let's talk about what she said when she noticed him. He was quiet. He was mild-mannered. He wanted to be there. He wanted to do the tests. He was not depressed. And he kept saying the same thing essentially throughout the testing. I'm smart. I know I didn't do great in school, but he wanted to impress her. And he used some big words, and I would say he used some correctly and some incorrectly, like he did with Dr. Warner. He got a full-scale IQ of 71. That's what she got through the testing. At age 22, he reads at a 5th grade level. His math is at a 3rd grade level. The things that a lot of us take for granted in life that we get through life are genuinely harder for Isaiah Chance. Not impossible, just harder. She reviewed his Duval County school records, which I believe Dr. Werner glossed over. He had 3 tests done in school, and they all said the same thing at ages 4, at ages 10, and ages 12. 3 different other evaluators, independent. At age 4, said he had issues with speaking, and we heard from multiple of his witnesses telling you that he was nonverbal at that time. So corroboration. At age 10, he got the same score as Dr. Hardig got, corroboration. And at age 12, he was even a little bit lower, again. And then he's removed from that school. People with IQs in this range are not unintelligent. They can form relationships. They can have jobs. And we're not asking you to weigh his IQ as an excuse, but just as context, something you can weigh when you're back there deliberating on mitigation. She also diagnosed ADHD, and the clinical observations you saw from school showed the same thing. Off task over 30% of the time, way more than his classmates, and it was never treated. The state talked about a co-defendant not having IQ tests because they didn't provide corroboration, and they talked about that as a bad thing. Well, we have corroboration from 3 IQ tests, and they don't want you to look at that, and I'm asking you to look at those IQ tests that corroborate Dr. Hardig's and go against what Dr. Warner said. And the last thing I want to say about Dr. Warner is she said that she trusted the testing that was done in school, trusted the testing that Dr. Hardig did, trusted and agreed with the results of both, but disagreed with the diagnosis, which is based on the results. And I would say that doesn't follow. We also heard that he could be vulnerable in the wrong environment. He has a lifelong need to belong, and that's a human, that's a character. It's not a character flaw. It's just a human need. But I want to talk about what the right environment looked like. That looked like what Mr. Nix provided. When Mr. Nix was there, when he provided structure, when someone was paying attention, made real progress. Isaiah made real progress. It tells you something. Isaiah Chance is not someone who's beyond reach. He's someone who does better when someone is paying attention. We're not here to ask you to believe that he will never struggle again. We're asking you to believe that struggle will be worth it, that he has value, that it matters, that he is not what happened in the worst moments of his life. Now, the state pointed to the aggravators. They spent a lot of time on the aggravators, and we're not here to minimize what happened, not at all. We're not here to argue those either. We're here to talk about this young man, him as a human being, about things that make his life worth saving. We're here to tell you we believe the mitigators outweigh the aggravators. Like Ms. Finkelstein said, you're going to get a list of the mitigators. I'm not going to go through all of them. I do want to go through a few of them. And you give whatever weight you believe to these mitigators. Isaiah Chance has no significant history of prior criminal activity. You heard from his mom and his dad, no arrests, nothing. His age at the time of the crime, he was 21 years old at the time of this crime. He was a young man. Like I said, he suffers from borderline intellectual disability and untreated ADHD. His loving relationship with his children, which I'll get into in a little bit. His loving relationship that you heard from his family and friends that goes both ways. Isaiah Chance did not carry, use, or threaten to use a firearm during the commission of this offense. Let me be clear, this in no way lessens his guilt. But it is a fact that you can consider when you're back there, that he did not have a firearm during this offense. And again, there's the catch-all. Anything else you heard from any witnesses on that stand that you saw, that you believe is a mitigator, you can use. Isaiah Chance is a son, a brother, a grandson, and father whose life has meaning to others. His children, Kabri, Kylan, and Amiri. His mom told you he was a great father. He wanted to be involved with his kids. Miss Wade told you he was always calling her, asking her for advice. He wanted to be involved. He was present. He was trying to be a good father. He was 21 years old with 3 kids, actively seeking out guidance to be a better father. That is not the behavior of someone who doesn't care. That is the behavior of a young man who understood that fatherhood mattered and was trying imperfectly to rise to it. He cherished his fatherhood and has a great relationship with his 3 children. That is not nothing. For a 21-year-old who may have some limitations, trying to figure out how to be present for 3 children, that effort means something. It tells you something about who he is when the stakes are personal. He showed up for his children, just like he showed up for his grandparents. It's not a legal argument. It's a fact about what it means to be human. His kids are growing up right now. One day they will be old enough to know their father, to write him a letter, to ask him a question only he can answer. And he will be in prison. But a father can still be a father behind bars. A letter, a phone call, a presence. We are simply asking for you to leave that door open. 7 people testified in the penalty phase. 6 who have known him parts or all of his life, and a doctor. Dr. Hardy told you the clinical side. People like Isaiah are a little more vulnerable. They want to belong. They want to follow because it's safer than the alternative. He spent his entire life working harder than other people, failing and trying again. He put his family first and truly sacrificed on multiple occasions when it mattered. He sat in church with Nana and Mr. Nix and talked about God and life. He was a great brother and a great and attentive father. He's someone's son, someone's grandson, someone's father. He's a human being with limitations and with love. You heard about the continued support he will get while in prison. On behalf of his mother, who raised him with structure and love, his father, who was there for his son and still wants to be there for his son, Elizabeth Jordan, who he sat in her lap his entire life, and Nashawn Nix, a man who owes him nothing but showed up here to tell you that he loves him, and he better know that he still loves him. We are asking you to spare his life. The family did not need to come here. They chose to. They sat in the witness chair knowing everything that you know, and they want to tell you that this person is not beyond saving. They're not in denial. They know what happened. They still came here, and they're still asking. That says something about Isaiah Chance that no test score or school record can fully capture. It tells you the people who know him best, who have seen every version of him, have decided he's worth fighting for. And we are asking you to agree with them. The death penalty is reserved for the worst of the worst. And we would argue that Isaiah Chance and the facts of this case do not meet that criteria. He's not the kind of person for whom there's no threat of redemption or no evident conscience that the death penalty was designed for. Death is never required. Again, as I say in my opening, the law favors life because it always gives you the opportunity to give mercy. We are asking you to consider that a person can do something unforgivable and still not be beyond the reach of mercy. Isaiah Chance will spend the rest of his life in prison. He will carry what happened to him every day. We are not asking for you to forgive what happened. We are not asking you to forget it, minimize it, or look away. We are asking you to look at the full human being, everything I've talked about and everything you've heard from the stand, and decide that death is not the answer. Justice will be served. He will spend his life in prison. Today's the last day he's going to wear street clothes. Last time we'll put a suit on. Mercy does not mean forgetting. Mercy means choosing deliberately and with full knowledge what you know to let someone live. The law gives you that option, gives you the option for a reason. We are asking that you use it. We are asking that you spare Isaiah Chance's life. Thank you.
Okay, very good. Ms. Toomey, on behalf of Davion Murphy.
Good morning. Davion Murphy was born January 10th, 1997. A blank canvas, wide-eyed to the world, not knowing his limitations, not knowing good from bad. But children learn what they see every day. When children learn criticism, they learn to condemn. When they learn hostility and violence, they become violent and fight. When children live with instability, they become unstable. Now, as I told you in my opening, Florida has no parole. There's no gain time. As Davion Murphy sits there now, and all of these other defendants, they will be given life in prison. The only question for you is when he dies, either by natural causes or by execution. That's the only decision that is left to make. And this is probably the most important decision that you will make in your life. The fate of another human being is in your hands. I want to pose a question to you, and that is, what good comes from executing Davion Murphy? It seems like a simple question. It's not so simple. I think it was Gandhi that said, an eye for an eye eventually leaves everyone blind. There is no need to execute Davion Murphy. Life in prison, a life, along with thinking about this every single day. Perhaps even maybe walking down the same hallway as his father, stomping the same concrete in those hallways in the Florida Department of Corrections as his father, his uncle, his younger brother that testified, his blood cousin, Rashad Murphy. A vote of death will only be the next statistic in this gang war that started in Jacksonville. It'll be just another statistic. And what comes from executing another human being? Nothing comes from it. It's not going to bring Charles Jones back. It's not going to change the events that occurred on June 23rd of 2023. It simply perpetuates the violence that started long, long ago, not here in Hillsborough County, but in Jacksonville. As you heard from the state's witnesses, the detectives, the gang detectives, so much violence so in these gangs that they have detectives that are given certain gangs to follow. That's what Davion Murphy grew up in. He grew up in East Jacksonville. Davion Murphy wasn't born into a life of privilege and opportunity. He was born into violence and instability. What chance did he have? And folks, I'm not offering you an excuse for these events or what happened. It's tragic. I'm simply offering you context of the facts. Context. Davion Murphy was 12 years old when his father, who suffered from schizophrenia, was given life in prison for murder, along with his uncle, his parental uncle, who also was given 50 years in prison for murder. When he was 12 years old, his father was gone, absent from his life. And you heard from his youngest brother, Adam Gooden, his youngest brother, who broke down in front of you all. Well, they grew up in the same environment. They had the same mother. They had different fathers. But if you recall, Adam Gooden also told you that his father was incarcerated in prison. This is a generational violence, instability, insecurity that these men grew up in. When I say these men, I mean Davion and his cousin. And you got to see this firsthand through the state's witnesses, their detectives, as well as through the individuals that testified on Davion's behalf. Take a technically, intellectually disabled child with learning disabilities, throw him into the violence and crime in the streets of Jacksonville. What happens? They look for comfort. They look for a father figure. What becomes the father figure for them? The streets, the gangs. Now, as you saw, not only did Dr. Eisenstein, and we'll get to that in a moment, but Dr. Eisenstein testified that he was borderline intellectually disabled. They had long ago indicated that Davion Murphy had a mental disability. He was in special classes, he was in IEP classes, he had to repeat various grades, and he also suffered traumatic brain injury from all the various events that occurred in his life. Multiple motor vehicle accidents, fights, falling off a golf cart, or running a golf cart into a tree. And folks, these scans, these images weren't done because he was found guilty. The state knows better than that.
Judge, objection, that's an improper statement. It's a misstatement of the law, and that's improper.
Sustain the objection.
These scans were done to show you that Davion Murphy suffers brain damage. What does Dr. Rubino have to come in here to risk his medical license to say, and you saw the scans, and you can take it back if you want to look at them, to say that he suffers from brain damage? And the state had its radiologist, a diagnostic radiologist, of whom I respect, Dr. Glickstein, I respect, but he doesn't have the knowledge and the upkeep of the new technologies. He wasn't able to, he hasn't seen he said, I think it was like once an MRI, DTI, which is commonly done in these radiology facilities. Why would a neuropsychologist recommend scans that a neurologist send to a radiology facility that then conducts the scans and gets those images, perform those? It's a big liability there. I suggest to you that he does have brain damage. You can watch the interrogation video yourself. That's demonstrative evidence of the state of mind of Davion Murphy. and his intellect. Now let's talk about a little bit about mitigation. As you've heard, it's not a numbers game, it's not a calculation, it's not who's got more mitigation. It's about the weight and the significance of that mitigation. I'm not going to address the aggravating factors. I'm not going to waste your time. I'm not going to insult any one of you. But the mitigation that was presented on behalf of Davion Murphy is substantial and is great, and it deserves great weight. And you also have to remember that the mitigating circumstances have to be proven, not beyond a reasonable doubt, but by a preponderance of the evidence. I submit to you that Dr. Eisenstein, who met with Davion Murphy 7 times in person over the course of 6 months for over 20 hours, has a better idea, a better understanding of what Davion Murphy is about, not Dr. Warner, who met with him by Zoom for 80 minutes. And then when asked by the state about why she had such limited time, was because the jail only gave her 3 hours or something like that. Well, if you only had 3 hours, then say you need enough time. You didn't have enough time. You can't render a proper diagnosis or render an opinion because you didn't have enough time. Dr. Eisenstein had enough time. He took the time to know Davion Murphy, went through his records, his medical records. And why did we not provide Dr. Eisenstein with police reports, videotape interrogation, videos and such? Because we wanted to make sure that there was no bias, that Dr. Eisenstein met with Davion Murphy, without any bias in his mind. That's why. I suggest to you that Davion Murphy's life is worthy. Davion Murphy is worthy. That he is redeemable. That he's made a grievous mistake. And that he should be punished. He will be punished. He's being punished every day. And he will be punished every day for the rest of his life. There's no doubt. But it's your job to look at him as an individual, all of these defendants as individuals, and not compare one to the other, but look at each of them as an individual person, and then decide whether the mitigation, which has a lower burden, and rightfully so, has been proven in substantially or outweighs the aggravation in this case. It has to make the crime more grievous. It doesn't. Life is the appropriate sentence. There's nothing that a death sentence is going to do in this case. So the mitigators that you have on behalf of Davion Murphy is the capacity of Davion Murphy to appreciate the criminality of his conduct or conform his conduct to the requirements of law. That's one. He's got 13, but once again, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter if you've got 50 or if you've got 100 and it's not a numbers game. It's not who's got more or who's got more aggravators versus mitigators. The second one, the capital felony was committed while Davion Murphy was under the influence of extreme mental and emotional disturbance. That's where Dr. Eisenstein comes in. That's where Dr. Rubino comes in with their testimony. The age of Davion Murphy. He was 27, but when you consider the testimony of Dr. Eisenstein, the age of the person on the outside isn't necessarily the age of the person on the inside. Davion Murphy suffers from traumatic brain injury. Yes, Dr. Rubino testified that he did. And doctors, they disagree. They do disagree. You have to decide who you believe. And once again, we don't have to prove beyond a reasonable doubt that these mitigators exist. Just a preponderance of the evidence, greater weight of the evidence. Davion Murphy is in the borderline range of intellectual disability. Let's talk about Dr. Warner for a minute. She indicated that he was low average, I think is what she testified to. But she's not, doesn't have the ability to do any psychological testing, didn't do an IQ test, didn't do really basically anything. She did a mental status examination of Davion Murphy. That was not rebutted, wasn't disproved. Davion Murphy did not have a stable role model in his life. No, he did not. Neither did his younger brother. Davion Murphy's father was diagnosed with schizophrenia. Yes, you heard from Winston Murphy, who was very reluctant to testify, but yes, that was his brother, and he testified that his brother, who is Davion Murphy's father, was diagnosed with schizophrenia. Davion Murphy's father was incarcerated for life when Davion Murphy was 12 years old. Yes. Davion Murphy took on a parental role for his younger siblings. Yes, because he had to. I think Adam Gooden testified that he had to sell, or they would sell a PlayStation or something like that to get food. Davion Murphy is loved by his family. Yes, yes he is. And then the existence of anything else. That means that mitigation to you can be anything else that you decide it to be. You get to decide. Maybe it's something I didn't say or wasn't presented to you. Maybe it's something that just because. Just because you think life is more appropriate than death, than execution. Because this vote is individual to each one of you. It's an individual moral judgment that each one of you have. Yes, you have to go back and discuss the evidence and things, but it's your vote. It's not anyone's vote, and don't let anyone else try and convince you of what your vote should be when you go back there. It's your decision. Folks, gang violence tears apart families, neighborhoods, and futures. And that's exactly what it did with all these families, Charles Jones' family. The death penalty only guarantees that suffering and that violence continues. Life in prison for Davion is a just punishment. It removes him from society. And we can be tough on crime without the death penalty and just giving him life in prison. Now this is the verdict form. And once again, just like in the guilt phase, excuse me, just like in the guilt phase, just because you didn't hear from Davion Murphy, like you heard from Sean Gathright in the penalty phase, doesn't mean you can hold that against him. He's got the right to remain silent, and you cannot use that against him. Just want to remind you of that, for any of the defendants that did not testify in the penalty phase. But here's the verdict form. It's 3 pages long, but on that second page is where it has jury recommendation. And you might think, well, it's just a recommendation. It is, but your recommendation will be given great weight by the court. So when you vote, it's going to be the vote. It's going to be the deciding factor as to what these individuals get, life or death. If fewer than 8 jurors vote for the death penalty, your recommendation must be for the penalty of life in prison without the possibility of parole. Fewer than 8. That means 7 of you can vote for death, 5 of you can vote for life, and they would get life. I submit to you that you really don't need to even get there, folks, because you could just go right to the bottom and find that Davion Murphy should be sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. That is a just punishment in this case. This is not the most aggravated of murders and the least mitigated. What good would it do to execute an intellectually challenged, brain damaged 29-year-old male who's grown up on the streets of Jacksonville just trying to survive the gangs and the violence? He lived and did what he saw every single day. He's going to be punished enough. You can tell Davion Murphy that he did a terrible thing. This is terrible. It's tragic. But you can also tell him that he's redeemable and he has worth with a vote for life. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Toomey. And Mr. Hernandez, on behalf of Rashad Murphy.
Please, the court.
Yes.
Counsel. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I want to begin again by thanking you very much for your service, your attentive service in this case. As you know, I am speaking on behalf of Rashad Murphy. I cannot imagine an attorney having a more overwhelming responsibility than advocating for a man's life. And here we are. As we go through the evidence that was presented and the mitigating circumstances that have been proposed, I want to make sure that there is no attempt to misstate. If I say something, I've got notes, you have your notes. If I say something that you remember differently, please rely on your notes and your collective memories. You've heard it several times during this case, and I'll go briefly through it. Your recommendation is extremely important. It carries great weight. The judge has to give it great weight. And the mitigating circumstances that have been proposed by Rashad Murphy and the other defendants only have to be proven by the greater weight of the evidence. If you believe that it more than likely exists, you can consider it and give it the weight that you decide it deserves. And those mitigating circumstances can be facts about the case, or it can be facts related to Rashad Murphy as a person, as a human being, such as the mental issues that have been presented, his childhood, his history, his accomplishments. It can also be your personal observations of Mr. Murphy's behavior during the last 6 weeks, as you've had a chance to observe him for 6 consecutive weeks. And your vote, although you deliberate, each vote is individual, and although there is a weighing process, you ultimately are being asked to decide what is the appropriate vote, either a life recommendation without the possibility of parole or death. Ladies and gentlemen, nothing that I am saying during my closing arguments is designed to in any way minimize the tragedy for Charles Jones and his family. Death resulted regardless of the details. His family, the family of Mr. Jones, grieves regardless of the details. All that is a given before your analysis in this penalty phase begins. And the same principle applies to the crime of murder. All murders involve some level of violence, some less, some more, but they all involve some level of violence. All first-degree murders involve either premeditation or while committing a serious crime such as robbery or rape. Nevertheless, and that's why we're here, nevertheless, not all first-degree murders warrant the death penalty. And I submit to you that in the case of Rashad Murphy, the death penalty is not warranted. But we need an analysis of the facts of the case, but also of the person who Rashad Murphy is. You heard from several family members. You heard from his fiancee, Charmaine Staker, and the mother, his fiancee, that they've known each other for, I believe, 15 or more years, and the mother of his 4 children. You also heard from 2 of his aunts, Hazel Dickerson and Jamila Murphy, as well as his uncle who's in prison, who testified here as well, Winston Murphy. They all made it clear to you that they love him very much and that he has a lot of redeeming qualities. They all confirmed, in one way or the other, they all confirmed Mr. Murphy's difficult childhood, his personal history, being an excellent father and brother to his siblings. They all had some knowledge, some more, some less, of the physical and emotional abuse that Rashad Murphy suffered growing up, that he witnessed gun violence and lived in a high crime area, that he was raising 6 children when he was arrested in this case, his 4 children and 2 of his younger siblings. Despite working and having a limited income, he was raising 6 children. You heard that he was consistently employed, and that you also heard from Ms. Steger, his aunts, that they would continue to have contact with Mr. Murphy and visit him in prison as he would be serving if he ultimately gets a life sentence without the possibility of parole. And with something that Mr. Harmon said yesterday, I want to make it clear, and I think you would agree. The fact that he has some loving family members, such as his fiancee, but going back to his childhood, having 2 loving aunts, does not in any way erase the extremely difficult childhood that he had without a father and with a mother with a serious drug problem, and obviously he was taken out of the family home and placed into foster care because of that. You also heard from Dr. Collins, a licensed psychologist. He testified and has previously testified as an expert in neuropsychology. He was appointed by the court and paid by the state of Florida. He was asked by me to evaluate the defendant, Mr. Murphy, and possibly testify in this case, which he did, obviously. Before he testified, he was provided reports, not everything in the case, but provided records to review. Some about the case itself, so that he would have a sufficient amount to become familiar with the facts of the case and the evidence in the case. But also about the defendant, before he even sees the defendant at the jail, things that would give him knowledge of the defendant as a person, his background, his childhood history, his mental history, jail records, because by that time he's been in jail on this case for a period of time. And then he has contact with the defendant on 2 occasions. I believe his testimony that he ultimately spent a total of 7 hours with Mr. Murphy. Part of that contact is to interview him, just chit-chat, have a conversation with him. And the purpose of that is to get to know him, to find out, to determine whether he is going to be cooperative, and whether he is going to provide truthful information, because whatever he says can be compared to records that he's had a chance to review. And then part of that time is to conduct psychological testing, standard accepted test to analyze and diagnose. Dr. Collins testified, and none of this really is being refuted by the state. He was cooperative. There were tests done to find out if he was in any way faking and malingering. That was not the case. He was definitely cooperative and not malingering. The important thing, or at least one of the important things, is that the interview, the testing, and the records that were reviewed by Dr. Collins were all consistent, clearly indicating that Mr. Murphy was being truthful regarding his self-reporting about his childhood, about his background, about his history, and about his mental state. Dr. Collins testified that Rashad Murphy suffers from anxiety and depression stemming from childhood trauma that would be intensified throughout his adulthood. That he, Rashad Murphy, was physically and emotionally abused by his father, by his stepfather, and in the foster home. And that his mother suffered from severe drug addiction and ultimately died, where leaving Mr. Murphy with having to, by this time he's of course out of the foster home, and having to take care of his younger siblings. He confirmed, Dr. Collins confirmed, that drugs and violence were common in his community, in the community that Rashad Murphy grew up in when he was not in foster home. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm trying not to be repetitious, but the fact is that Rashad Murphy was born into violence and suffered a lot of abuse and neglect. He was removed from his father's care by the state when he was a small child. And all of this is confirmed by Dr. Collins, not just talking to Rashad Murphy, but looking at all the records. And then, as I said a minute ago, is that back after, I think it was 2018, when his mother died, he adopted his younger siblings. He was employed, but obviously a limited income, trying to not only financially support his fiancee, his 4 children, but also his 2 younger siblings. Dr. Collins also confirmed other records, and of course you heard from Ms. Steger, that he had a loving relationship with his childhood sweetheart and mother of his 4 children, that he was an excellent father, hard worker throughout his adulthood. The diagnosis by Dr. Collins is that Mr. Murphy suffers from post-traumatic stress disorder, PTSD. And as you know, it's a mental condition triggered by experiencing and or witnessing terrifying events. And it disrupts daily life. It affects his judgment, his decision-making as an adult. And it goes back to his childhood. Once someone has PTSD, it doesn't magically go away. It can be treated with psychotherapy and medication, but his condition is always there and does not go away, and it relates back to his childhood. And again, I should point out that, and I'll get to it in a minute, that Mr. Harmon, in cross-examination, I think, tried to discount it somewhat, but there was never anything presented by the state refuting this diagnosis. There was also the fact that his father, Rashad's father, had mental problems. That was documented. And also that Mr. Murphy's condition was noted in the jail records by state doctors before Dr. Collins even got involved. So you have corroboration that is and not disputed by the state, discounted but not disputed. There's no expert saying otherwise. You also, through the testimony of Dr. Collins, you heard that several examples of Mr. Rashad Murphy trying to help himself, better himself as a person while in prison. Ladies and gentlemen, that evidence has more than one indication. I suggest to you that it does show that he's trying to better himself as a person, but it also shows that it's indicative of him not being a troublemaker, adapting to prison life, following strict rules and regulations, that if he was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole, he would not be a problem, a troublemaker in prison. He's been in jail 2 years without any problems. And as I said, trying to better himself, you have the exhibits that you can look at when you go back to deliberate. There were 3 composite exhibits presented to you. One is Defense Exhibit 1 dealt with education. He got his GED while in prison, while in jail, not prison. He got his GED while incarcerated on this case. He also, there's a series. Defense Exhibit number 2 has several, I forget how many, 8 or 9 attached to that exhibit about different religious certificates and classes that he's attended, different religions, just showing religious awareness. But it also was presented during the testimony that he not only has been taking these classes, he has been teaching some of these classes to other inmates. He serves as a mentor in prison, in jail. I keep saying, I don't mean to say prison, Hillsborough County Jail. And then Defense Exhibit number 3 is a composite of certificates dealing generally with self-help, parenting classes, dealing with Alcoholics Anonymous, emotional regulation, things of that nature. And ladies and gentlemen, I think what I'm saying, it feels it's too obvious to mention. None of this testimony and exhibits are offered as legal defenses or excuses for the homicide. But as you know, all first-degree murders are inexcusable. But they certainly are offered as valid mitigating circumstances, showing that the defendant, Rashad Murphy, has many redeeming values, showing that a life recommendation is appropriate. The court, when we get to part of the instructions, when we get to specifically Rashad Murphy, the defense is offered to you a series of proposed mitigating circumstances, and that they will be read to you. One of them, and I think there's a couple that have to do with the fact that he has no prior criminal history, and we'll talk about that in a minute. No prior felony convictions. There's also a couple, they're kind of interchangeable, that Rashad Murphy, his age at the time of the offense, he was only 30 years old when the homicide occurred. There's no dispute of this. It's there for your consideration. The state never is not disputing it. It was stipulated to. Another proposed mitigator is Rashad Murphy has a history of physical and emotional abuse as a child consistent with childhood post-traumatic stress disorder. You heard from Dr. Collins. You heard from the record from the jail doctors. I think there's certainly corroboration of that, and again, something that has not been refuted by the state. You will also hear that Rashad Murphy has maintained a loving relationship with family and friends while incarcerated. And again, you heard that from the fiancee, Ms. Steger, his uncle, and his aunts. Another proposed mitigator is that Rashad Murphy has developed religious and spiritual awareness while incarcerated. In fact, you heard testimony that he was religious before, but certainly the exhibits and his family's testimony corroborate that. Also, Rashad Murphy helped raise his younger siblings, including working jobs at a young age to provide family support. Certainly that was corroborated by the records and by the testimony of his family. And the same thing with the next one, which is Rashad Murphy as a minor was removed from his primary home and placed into foster care due to negligent and abusive situations in the primary home. Also, Rashad Murphy has displayed appropriate behavior and the ability to follow rules while incarcerated. And again, that's corroborated not just by the exhibits and the records. He has been no problem whatsoever while he's been incarcerated. And that's an indication of what type of prisoner he would be if he is sent to prison for life. You also are being told the existence of any other factors in Rashad Murphy's character, background, or life, or the circumstances of the offense that would mitigate against the imposition of the death sentence. And we'll get to, I will touch base on some of these mitigators, but if there's something I forgot, something that you believe in your observations or hearing, please rely on that as well. Now let's go back to some of these. His age, which is two of the proposed mitigating circumstances. He was 30 years old at the time of the homicide. He's presently 32 years of age. To some extent, I would suggest that age is an interesting number. He's still a young man. He's still a young man. He was only 30 at the time of the offense. And it certainly, that alone is offered as a significant mitigating circumstance. However, it also is old enough to have established a pattern, good or bad. It's certainly at the age of 30, you've been an adult for 12 years. It's certainly old enough to have become a career offender. But here we have no felony convictions whatsoever. So here we have 12 years of adulthood to look at, and we have a good pattern. With his background and environment, with the violence surrounding him, with the abuse inflicted on him, I suggest to you that it's extraordinary that he made it to the age of 30 with no criminal history. Let's go back a minute to the PTSD. As I said before, the state is not refusing the mental condition. And no state doctor testified saying, refuting the opinion of Dr. Collins. I think it's fair to say that the state is suggesting that considering everything, it's not important because you found the defendant guilty of first-degree murder. And as I said before, it's not offered as a defense, but it is presented to you as a significant mitigating circumstance for your consideration. And I think it's somewhat disingenuous for the state in their cross-examination to imply that the defendant's mental condition is normal for someone who's incarcerated. Of course, being in jail, getting arrested, got to be stressful. But that's not what we have here. The defendant's childhood is not normal. Getting abused by his father and stepfather is not normal, ladies and gentlemen. Growing up in the violent environment is not normal. Being abused at the foster home is not normal. Neglect due to his mother's addiction is not normal. Touching back briefly on his behavior while he's been in jail on this case, and as I said, it shows that he knows he's not he doesn't cause trouble at the jail. But I think it should be emphasized that he can be, in addition to having contact with his family, he can be a positive influence on other prisoners. He's been teaching Bible classes. He can mentor other inmates now in jail and later in prison. And as I said, he would, as you've heard testimony, the evidence has shown, and his behavior has shown, that he would continue to be able to maintain a living relationship with his family and friends while in prison. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, all first-degree murders are not the same. That's just the bottom line. And that's a decision, a vote that you have to consider. The facts and circumstances are always different. All defendants convicted of first-degree murder are not the same. And, of course, as a corollary to that, not all first-degree murders warrant a death sentence. I suggest to you that the death sentence should be reserved for the worst cases. All murders involve the death of a human being. All murders involve some level of violence. But here we don't have any torture. We don't have multiple deaths. Here, we don't have separate incidents. It was all one event, a terrible event. I mean, there's no way to describe it otherwise. A terrible event, but only one contemporaneous event. You determined justice. You determined justice was served with your verdict. As you've been told more than once, Rashad Murphy will die in prison regardless of your vote. And based on your verdict, a severe punishment is appropriate, and there's only two choices. I submit to you that justice will be served. It will be further served by severely punishing Rashad Murphy by making him spend the rest of his life, which, according to normal life expectancy, could be another 50 years, to spend the rest of his life in prison, to live under strict rules and regulations without the basic freedoms we normally take for granted, that we normally enjoy. And I'm trying not to be repetitious, but I need to go back for a moment to this lack of any prior felony convictions. I cannot, ladies and gentlemen, I cannot overemphasize this. Despite the terrible environment the defendant grew up in, despite those scars, despite the mental ill issues he lives with on a daily basis and will continue to live with, despite whatever treatment he gets, the defendant, Rashad Murphy, has no prior felony convictions, not one. And I ask you, when you decide on your vote, compare that fact, that stipulated fact, to a career offender. Compare that fact to someone who has a prior record of similar crimes or violent behavior. Compare that stipulated fact to the state's argument that the attempted murders serve as an aggravating factor, despite being only one contemporaneous event. Compare that stipulated fact to the state's argument that an aggravating factor is that the defendant was a criminal gang member. All that, all those allegations, all those factors, despite the fact that he has no prior felony convictions. I submit to you that the mitigating circumstances outweigh any aggravating factors presented by the state. But in any event, I submit the mitigating factors clearly show that a life recommendation is warranted with respect to Rashad Murphy. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, I have not offered this evidence or made this closing argument to in any way justify the homicide. My only point is that the evidence presented, all corroborated, demonstrates that a life recommendation is appropriate for Rashad Murphy. And finally, I want to talk about Rashad Murphy's children. 2 sons, 2 daughters, between the ages of 7 and 13. Pretty much the ages that the defendant was when he was experiencing some of this abuse and separation from his family growing up. Despite being in prison for the rest of his life, he was an excellent father, he is an excellent father, and he can still be a positive influence on his children. He has been and would continue to be a loving and supportive father. Please let him carry on as daddy to Major, to Avery, to Prosper and Gabrielle, guiding them to do the right thing. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Mr. Hernandez. Okay.